Hi everyone, and welcome to our live stream, wherever you are in the world, whatever time zone you're in. What are we? We debriefing Saudi Arabia, or are we having a look ahead to the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne? Probably a little bit of both, I would imagine. Quite a lot of chat already about that Saudi Arabian race. Another 1-2 for Red Bull. Boring. No, not boring, not boring. Wonderful. Great result for them. Lots to talk about, of course, behind the scenes. The most interesting news, actually, I think, for a long time, is that Felipe Massa, you may remember Felipe Massa, nearly won the 2008 Formula One World Championship. Lost it on that last lap of the Brazilian Grand Prix when Lewis managed to get around Timo Glock coming up the hill and stole victory from Felipe when they thought they'd got it. The whole family were there in the Ferrari garage. You probably remember those dramatic scenes. Anyway, interestingly, Felipe is now going to sue the FIA and Bernie Ecclestone over that 2008 World Championship on the basis that he thinks he should have won it. Not because of what happened in Brazil, no issues there, but what happened in Singapore that year. And I'm going to start the live stream just by talking about that because I think it's fascinating, actually. We'll see how it goes in terms of the end result. But that Felipe's even doing this, I think, is amazingly brave. And I totally commend him for doing it because I think he's got a serious point. And the point is that the 28 Singapore Grand Prix, as you may remember, is known as Crash Gate. And it was the race in which quite early in the race, literally about lap 17, I think it was. I was there, I should remember it. Nelson Piquet Jr. deliberately crashed his Benetton Renault, well, his Renault, and therefore initiated a safety car when obviously Fernando had already planned to come in at that point. Nobody else was. And that enabled him to win the Grand Prix. And his point is that since the FIA, Felipe's point is that since the FIA have subsequently declared that that is what took place, and for a while, some of the key protagonists, Flavio Briatore and Pat Symonds, were suspended, that those suspensions were then lifted, particularly in the case of Pat Symonds, who's now doing a great job at Formula One with Liberty. But because of that, because it was all acknowledged that that race should have been deleted from the World Championship as a non-race. And that's an interesting point. And I've been wondering ever since I read that if there is a precedent for that sort of thing. You know, deliberately crashing is very unusual anyway. A race being subsequently deleted from the championship, well, that's not unheard of, that is for sure, and we'll get onto that in a minute. I think the nearest precedent to this is potentially the 97 World Drivers' Championship, when Michael Schumacher was found guilty of taking, or attempting to take Jacques Villeneuve out of the European Grand Prix at Jerez. And the penalty was to disqualify him from the World Championship, the complete World Championship. Now, as it happened, it didn't make a lot of difference. Okay, if you look at the results now, Heinz-Harald Frentzen, I think, was finished second, and maybe DC, I would imagine, probably P3 in that year, although in theory, normally it would have been Michael. But Ferrari got to keep their Constructors' Championship points, and Michael got to keep his race wins, and he didn't have any penalties other than that. So it really didn't affect anything. It was just the way it was added up at the end of the year. But in terms of who won which Grand Prix in 97, Michael kept all these wins. So it didn't actually have that much effect. But it was a precedent that a sweeping decision like that can be taken to exclude a driver from the World Championship because of one specific infringement. And you could argue, and I'm interested to see whether Felipe's lawyers argue this, that because of that one race, which was effectively a dud race because it had the wrong result, the wrong winner, should have been deleted from the championship, that did affect the championship as a whole. And of course, the point is that had that race been deleted from the championship, then Felipe would have been world champion because Lewis finished third in that Singapore Grand Prix, with enough points, obviously, to have won the championship in Brazil. So that's really interesting, isn't it, that he's doing that? And I think it opens, even if he doesn't succeed, and probably he won't, I guess, because, and this is what I'm really interested in seeing. I'm really interested in the fact that Formula One is a private club in effect, and it takes its legal cases up to an appeals court, which is within the FIA. And obviously the FIA can, presumably aren't really going to rule against themselves. I imagine they won't. You never know. But it'll be interesting to see whether this barrister of Felipe's will take it beyond that to some sort of European Commission thing, or even bigger than that, beyond the scope of just a Formula One Court of Appeal, FIA Court of Appeal. So that's what will be the most interesting thing, I think, on that whole business. And then come what may, win, lose or draw on that, I think this then opens the door to a couple of other, well, specifically to the 81 South African Grand Prix, which I've gone on about several times. But if you thought that was bad in Singapore, look what happened in South Africa in 81. Yes, it was at a time when Formula One was going through a lot of political upheaval, and some races, the big teams, the big grandie teams, Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, didn't enter at that point. But it was still a serious Grand Prix with all the top Cosworth runners there. And I was standing next to Carlos Reutemann's Williams on the grid that day at Kyalami. And there was a lot of discussion about what this race was. And Bernie was going past. And of course, he knew Bernie really well. And he called Bernie over to the car and said, "Bernie, I know there's a lot of confusion. Shake my hand, look me in the eye, and tell me this race will count for the World Championship. Before the start, I want to know." And Bernie shook his hand, looked him in the eye and says, "Yes, Carlos, World Championship race," patted him on the helmet and went on. I remember it clearly as if it was yesterday. I was standing right next to the car. And Carlos won that race. Nelson Piquet, I think, was second or third, Bernie's driver. Anyway, about 3 months later, in settling with the FIA and getting Formula One back into some sort of united footing again, one of the agreements that Bernie gave was that the points would be taken away from that South African Grand Prix. And guess what? That then enabled Nelson Piquet to win the World Championship in 81, his driver. So if you think Crashgate Singapore 2018 was bad, 2008 rather, think what Felipe would think of South Africa 81. I mean, that was horrendous. And then going on from there, what about Abu Dhabi 21? You know, that was an absolute error of the huge proportion made at the wrong time, and it resulted in Max Verstappen winning the World Championship. That was a one race error, but as a result, Max won the World Championship. So on the basis of what Felipe is doing about 2008 in Singapore, in theory, there's certainly a lot more discussion to be had, as I keep saying on this live stream, about what happened at Abu Dhabi 21. Because in my view, those last couple of laps should have been not counted, or the last lap, and Lewis should have won that race, and he should have been world champion. And it's an interesting point, isn't it? I mean, if you said to Lewis now, and I'm sure he would, this would be, you could never ask him this in a press conference, because he would never give an honest answer, because he would never give an answer probably, because it's so hypothetical that it's, he doesn't want to hurt anybody, and equally doesn't want to go down those paths again. But deep down inside, if you said to Lewis Hamilton, if you lost the 2008 World Championship to Felipe Massa, but you got the 21 championship back, would you be comfortable with that? I think he'd be very comfortable with that. Not to say he didn't want to win in 2008, because he drove really well in 2008 and had some great races, but it was very different circumstances, wasn't it? And he knows how well Felipe drove that year and how competitive Felipe was. It was very, very close. I mean, the problem Felipe is going to have, I think, in this case, is his race was messed up by the fuel stop that he made as a result of that safety car intervention, because the fuel line became detached from the Ferrari rig and he went down the pit lane with half of it hanging out the back of the car, and subsequently I think he hit the wall or did something. It wasn't a good race. I mean, if he had finished second or something if he hadn't had such a messy race, maybe you'd have more chance of that race possibly being disqualified. But I think it's going to be kind of difficult for them to argue that the race should be taken off the calendar, taken off the championship, bearing in mind they had those errors on their side, which you could argue would have happened anyway. But that's not really the point, is it? I mean, the real point is that Lewis finished third. He got points in a race that was a rigged race. And they're saying that race should then have been deleted from the World Championship. So I think that's quite big news. And I think that's quite an interesting precedent for what we may see in some other race results. And I'm just thinking also of other stuff the FIA have done over the years. You know, you're thinking about, well, I'm thinking about, I don't know, 2018 Canadian Grand Prix, when that supermodel started to wave the flag at the wrong time. And, you know, what a mess that was. And what about the 82 Swiss Grand Prix, Dijon? The flag, this was not a supermodel, this was an FIA steward guy who started to twitch and get the flag ready 2 laps from the end of the race. I think from memory it was an 80-lap race or something like that. About lap 78, he started unfurling the checkered flag. And my buddy Peter Collins, who was running Lotus at the time, was very near race control and saw this, and very quick thinking, just ran to race control and sort of put a V sign up, meaning there's still 2 more laps to go. And there was sort of radios everywhere and people waving hands. And there was enough distraction to stop this guy waving this checkered flag early. But the interesting thing is that they then didn't wave it on the end of the 80th lap. And everybody then drove lap 81 flat out, still, you know, until they saw the checkered flag, as you would. Even though in the regulations, I think once the race has reached the exact finishing point, it's over, regardless of whether the checkered flag is shown or not. So, I mean, if you go back to Canada 2018, there were, I think there were a couple of overtakes that were deleted because the race was stopped early. And I think something about Daniel, I remember Daniel Ricciardo, who was running for Red Bull at the time, had some, I think he set his fastest lap or something on the lap that then was taken away from him. And I think one of the overtaking maneuvers involved Kevin Magnussen, from memory. You know, there's lots of weird things that have, well, not weird, inexcusable things really, in terms of administering the sport and doing it correctly. And so this case by Massa is the first time a driver has decided to do this. And interestingly, it's not just the FIA, it's Bernie Ecclestone as well, which is an interesting thing, isn't it? Because Massa has been very close to Bernie for most of his career. And whether or not he's brought Bernie into the loop and Bernie's going to be a hostile witness turn friendly witness or something, I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting one to me, but it's interesting that he's brought Bernie into it. But I think now that he's done that, these other instances that I've been talking about may well come into focus. And it's interesting times. I mean, Liberty will be looking back at this from not afar, that's for sure, but they'll be watching it, because this comes right under the heading of the administration of a sport that they own and promote. And the more drama there is about the administration of the sport, the worse it is, really. And so that's another interesting consequence of this. So I've said that from the outset. That was that news just came in today, and for me anyway, and I thought that's a really significant thing that we've now seen a driver take action for. Felipe, a few people have already said, "Oh, Felipe is just trying to stay in the news, or he's just trying to get a settlement." I don't believe he's doing it. I know Felipe quite well. I don't believe he'd be doing this for the money. I think he's doing this just to show that in reality, he could have, should have won the 2008 World Championship. And it does make you think. It's made me think again about that race and the repercussions of it. And as I say, just to repeat, his point is that Lewis finished third in that race, and that was a race that I kind of agree with him, it shouldn't have been in the World Championship. There was another really odd thing in that race as well, which made it kind of null and void. Remember Mark Webber? I think he retired, but he certainly had a drama with the gearbox when the thing selected 2 gears. It was found later it was because he was going over a bit of road under which a tram was passing, and the confused electrics of the tram and the electronics of the car jammed the gearbox. It was related to this train. I mean that's pretty far out as well, isn't it? And not that that's the fault of the FIA necessarily, but interesting, all those things. So lots to talk about as well. What else can I show you? Oh, just before we start, I always do a little of this preamble, don't I? Look at that. That's Jody Scheckter's current, well, he's had that for quite a long time now. And I think he had more than that. I think he had a 91710 as well, Can-Am car that he raced. But wow, those are the, well, maybe he's still got it. But he's going to auction all these cars at Monaco. Look at that. Which is your favourite car out of that lot? I mean, the Wolf won its first race. Not many cars in the history of the sport have won its first Grand Prix. Now the Wolf WR1 there, that's the blue and gold car. And you've got the Tyrrell in the back there in the middle, which was a fabulous car. That's the car, sadly, that Francois Sebert should have been driving in 1974, sorry. You've got the six-wheel Tyrrell there. Jody won a race in that. And you've got the orange Impact Formula 2 McLaren. I love that car. Ralph Bellamy design, beautiful car. And then various Formula Fords and so forth. And then at the front, you've got his McLaren M23. I guess that's probably the car he raced in the French Grand Prix and had that, when he was just brought the world to its feet incredibly quick in that French Grand Prix. And of course, he had that big shunt in the 73 British Grand Prix coming out of Woodcote. The M19 there is what he drove in 72 US Grand Prix, his Formula One debut from memory. And of course, the World Championship winning 1979 Ferrari T4. That'll be it. That's the championship winning car. That'll be the pièce de résistance, I would imagine, in terms of the money that he's going to get for these. The other car, the Gilles Villeneuve car, the same year, number 12 car, is owned by Jonathan Jacobazzi, who works for the Ferrari Formula One team. And his father, of course, was the Jacobazzi who sponsored Gilles, which is one of the reasons they have that car. And Diego Moreno was telling me this the other day. The ratios in the car are still the ratios that Gilles had in for Watkins Glen at the US Grand Prix in '79. That's kind of cute, isn't it? Brilliant. What else? One other thing. We're probably going to get some questions about Oliver Bearman and how well he drove in Saudi Arabia. And there's no doubt this guy's really quick. It was only a couple of live streams ago, I think, when I said, I'm going to become a Ollie Bearman fan because so many people are going after the great Kimi that somebody needs to look after Oliver. I think I said something like that anyway. He doesn't need much looking after now after what he did. And Ferrari just put out a whole bunch of video and interviews and stuff. And good to see Jock Clear getting some credit. As I say, he deserves a lot of credit for the work he's done with the Driver Academy, and particularly with Oliver Bearman. But I've always had a thing about the young drivers who don't make it, who don't have the opportunity. And for every Oliver Bearman, there is a quick driver out there who never has the opportunity. And I find that so heartbreaking in motor racing. And it's all to do with money. I'm not saying that the guys that make it all have money, but they also have breaks as well. But if you don't have any money at all, and you're on a shoestring absolutely all the time, it's always horrendous. And there's a very good chance then that you're not going to get the break because you're not going to be in the best team. You're not going to do the testing. You're not going to do it. But just have a look at this. This is 2021, Brands Hatch, British Formula 3, Ayrton Simmons on the pole in the Chris Dittman. That was a low budget operation, 120.2. Number 2, second fastest, Ollie Bearman, driving for Fortec. Pretty good team. He's ahead by 0.2. And Zach O'Sullivan, who's currently driving for ART in Formula 2, was P3. So Ayrton Simmons is a guy that I've known for quite a long time, and I know his dad quite well. I got to know his dad because he was one of the guys that used to hang out at Stowe or Beckett's or Copse or wherever at the British Grand Prix in the Mansell Mania era with big red 5 banners and flags. He was one of those guys. Anyway, total racing nut. And his son is called Ayrton for obvious reasons, Ayrton Simmons. And he was really quick, and he is really quick, Ayrton Simmons. I think he's trying to do Le Mans or something now. But he was really quick in Formula, I think it was Formula 4 below Formula 3. And then he was, whenever he had a chance in an underfinanced F3 operation, he was always super quick. He had a couple of opportunities. His dad spent a lot of money trying to get him into a FIA F3 team, and they got nowhere with it because it wasn't properly financed and everything else. And I just wanted to say, there's a classic example of a driver with a massive amount of talent, Ayrton Simmons, who has never had the chance to prove how good he is, but look how good he is. Formula 3 is quicker than Ollie Bearman and Zach O'Sullivan there on that day. So that's pretty impressive, I think. And I just wanted to say that because it's we shouldn't forget all these really talented guys that don't get the same opportunity as others. So there we are. wanted to say all of that. I've said probably much too much. And now I'm going to start questions, which, and we're going to begin with, let me have a look at this. I'm going to get sorted here now. M.A. Khan, I think, was the first off the grid to get, what are we doing here? Oh, I know what I'm doing wrong. Here we go. Sorry. Here we go. M.A. Khan, yeah. Hi, Peter. Oscar said in an interview, his driving is closer to Prost than Senna. He talked about how Senna's style requires more energy, where he likes to straighten his car, whereas he likes to straighten his car sooner. Do you agree? Yeah, absolutely. I've been saying that certainly from the beginning of last year, how well Oscar drives in terms of getting into the corner early, lengthening the straight, going into the corner, and then creating a little bit of an extra straight after rotation on exit. He's really good. He's really linear. And I think he's absolutely right. I mean, it's impressive that he's switched on enough to be able to tell the difference in style between Prost and Senna. I wonder how many current Grand Prix drivers, if you said to them, describe in detail the difference in style between Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna, they would probably go on about how Prost was always very safe and sure and the professor and always got the car right, and Ayrton was always on the edge, but they wouldn't actually go into the detail of how Ayrton had longer corners, brake more in a straight line than Prost. Yes, he did that absolutely to perfection, but it did mean that occasionally he had the big one. I'm not talking about Imola, obviously, but I'm talking about, say, Cadwell Park, Formula 3, good example. Whereas Prost, a great Max Verstappen style manipulative driver, always on top of what the car was going to do, always making sure that everything was soft and under control, to the point where, as I've said many times, I've told this story a couple of times anyway, to the point where when I took Frank Williams out to the back at Zandvoort when Prost was in the Renault Turbo to watch qualifying, and Prost put his pole lap in, Frank didn't even know it was a pole lap. He thought he was still on an out lap. He looked so good. He was so much on rails and just doing it perfectly. So yeah, for Oscar to know that, I have to say I'm even more impressed now than I was before, because it's impressive. And I think he's already said, I've followed Max, and he certainly does things differently from a lot of other drivers. And it's great that he's got his eyes open and he's watching and trying to improve and be better as a result. So the next one is Alessandra Durango. Hi, Peter. Despite the brake issue in Bahrain, Charles has shown a very solid performance in the last few races. It seems he's made a step forward in this respect. Do you agree? I do indeed, Alessandra. I really do. I think he's put a lot of what we saw, and we've had a lot of comments over the last 10 live streams about, some people saying Charles still very prone to mistakes and makes these errors, but he's tidied up his act a lot. He's looked a bit scrappy, I think, on the 2 days before the race, but in typical race driver fashion, he's got it well together beautifully on race day, and he's driven really well. I mean, we know all the issues he had in Bahrain. Well, we know the symptoms of the issues. We don't actually know the cause. I'm still trying to work out what happened with the brakes. I suspect it was debris. But in Saudi Arabia, that was the one of perhaps the most impressive thing was his performance and how that separated Ferrari from the McLaren, Aston Martin, Mercedes stuff. And to read the Mercedes stuff that's just come in, their debrief of the race, it's just one excuse after another. It's almost as if the lack of grip was a technical thing rather than just complete mess on the design of the car or the setup of the car. And no mention of top speed dramas either, because that to me was the most significant thing of all about Mercedes weekend. Anyway, we don't want to go into Mercedes because the question is not about that. I think Charles, is doing really well. And again, I put a lot of that credit in the corner of Jock Clear, who was given a new contract by Freddie Vasseur last year, an extended contract. I think Freddie appreciated immediately what Jock was doing there. He's one of the few engineers I know who's very good at the human side of performance as well as the data, and that's where he's really good, and he's spot on usually in terms of what is important and what isn't. And dare I say, he's a committed Rob Wilson guy as well. So yeah, that all makes a lot of sense to me, and that Charles wants Jock with him in that garage is very, very good news, and that Ferrari are letting Jock bring along the likes of Oliver Bearman is very, very good news as well in terms of the future of Ferrari. And I think a lot of what you're seeing there is that. Also, the car has a bigger sweet spot, which is what they needed. They're able to do more, therefore, when it comes down to tyre management. And yes, they've lost a bit of top speed, and you may find Ferrari won't be as competitive or as quick as they were in, say, Monza and Singapore last year, because they won't have that, unless they change things radically. Maybe they'll change the back end or something. But if they keep more or less where they are, they won't have that same top speed advantage. And so it won't be quite the same. But I think overall, they're going to have a bigger sweet spot on which to operate in all the races to come. So good job. They've done a really good job. MA Khan, going back to MA Khan, Peter Russell has on average been fractionally quicker than Lewis as teammates. Lewis says qualifying has been a weakness. How can he improve technically? Should he revert to shorter corners? My response to that is, I don't think it's a technical thing with Lewis. I think he's quite capable of driving short corners the way he wants to, if the car is giving him that sort of feel. And you need a certain amount of feel from the back of the car when you're doing that rotation, that rotation which is unique to short corner drivers. It's not the geometric apex. It's a rotation point, which is the moment of least downside to do that annoying thing, which is actually turn the steering wheel. And that changes lap by lap, corner by corner, based on all the variables that are changing all the time. And I think because he doesn't have that confidence, he's just sort of driving around it a little bit, and he's giving himself slightly longer corners just to give him a little bit more margin for things that are happening. But I think ultimately, as I've said all along, since Abu Dhabi 21, since the start of the 22 season, there's every reason to think that a young charger like George was always going to be fractionally quicker over a season than Lewis in qualifying, because he's always going to put it 100% on the line, A, and B, all he needs to do actually is beat Lewis Hamilton. So that's his thing. And whereas Lewis is, 7 times world champion, all that history, all that racing, all he's really interested in is having a car that he can really feel and drive the way he wants to drive it. And if it doesn't feel right, he's not going to put himself out there into George Russell territory. Why would he? He's not. That's not what Lewis Hamilton is these days. He's a 7 times world champion and can drive a very good race in a good car. So that's what's going on there. I don't think it's a technical thing, and I don't think when Lewis says qualifying, he's saying qualifying has been a weakness, and he's right. But I mean, the biggest issue for me actually was after Bahrain qualifying, when he said, well, I've got the car set up more for race conditions, and let's hope it works tomorrow. And that, to me, it's the first time I've ever heard Lewis say something like that. It sounded, and maybe he'd been prompted to say that by Toto or the engineers, I've no idea, but it sounded like a cop-out to me, because the risk in saying that is that if you then don't deliver on Sunday with your race set up relative to your teammate, then you are in trouble. And of course, that's exactly what happened. He didn't deliver. I mean, he had no chance. You could say he did the best probably in the circumstances, but he shouldn't have said that, I don't think, after qualifying. It should have just been other things. When you say that, it's always a drama. Paolo Souza, hi Peter, I drive in a sim called Assetto Corsa, and I can't help myself but drive the old 60s and 70s Formula One cars and think of all the things you've mentioned about that era. Well, yeah, there you go. Great cars. The 60s cars particularly, 1.5 litre cars, they were perfectly matched. I mean, not only were they perfectly matched to the racetracks of the time and the width of the track and all the obstacles that the tracks had, the cars were perfectly proportioned to that. But also they were perfectly proportioned, or is it the other way around? I don't know how it worked out, but the helmets were perfect for the size of the cockpit. The overalls were perfect for the look of everything. Everything was just perfectly imbalanced in the 60s, I think. I'm talking about the mid-60s. And don't forget, next year, 2025, is the anniversary of Jim Clark's astonishing achievement of winning the World Championship, Formula One, and the Indy 500 in the same year. And to do that, he had to miss the Monaco Grand Prix, and he still won the World Championship. So let's not forget that. I'm going to keep saying that every live stream between now and next. What's the actual anniversary? Is it going to be the German Grand Prix when he clinched the championship, which is August 25, or is it winning the Indy 500 on Memorial Day in May? Both of them. Let's do 2 celebrations. There you go. Anyway, thanks for that. Yeah, as for 70s, I mean, again, 70s, it got a little bit more hairy then, because the cars were quicker. The 3 litre Formula One cars were quicker, and we went through all the wing dramas at the back end of the 60s, and then the 70s the tracks were getting really dangerous, and the guardrails were poorly assembled at a lot of the circuits, and there were some terrible accidents, but they were impressive cars. I think the 60s cars were nicer to be honest. But the 70s cars were impressive to watch. I mean, I can still remember as if it was yesterday standing on the beginning of the fast downhill section at Barcelona at the bottom of the hill in qualifying in 73, watching Emerson, Ronnie, Carlos Reutemann, Chris Amon actually. He was in the Techno at the time, I think, but he was still unbelievably quick. I mean, it just made your eyes water just watching that. It really did. Dwight Hateman. Hi, Peter. Thank you so much for sharing your insightful, brilliant comments. That's not me, surely. I'm not insightful, brilliant. No. Would you mind taking a few minutes to explain the tyre allocation on a race weekend for each team? I'm the wrong person to ask about that, only because I tend not to worry about any of that stuff on the basis that what they start on is what they start on, and what they go to in the middle of the race is what they go to in the middle of the race. And if they're not on new mediums in the middle of the race and they go to scrub mediums, it's because they run out of sets and they haven't planned the weekend very well. I mean, without being too cynical about it, just wait and see what happens. That's my motto. But the reality is the teams do actually have to ask Pirelli beforehand. I think it's at least 4 months, something like that, for the allocation they want. They have to say to Pirelli, well, we want 4 sets of reds and 3 sets of yellows and 6 sets of whites, whatever they think is they're going to need for that circuit. And then Pirelli put out a statement to the press and the teams telling everybody what all the teams have allocated or chosen to have, and everybody gets excited about it. But I find it all, I don't know what I find it. I just let it go, red arrows straight over the top of my head, to be honest, because ultimately it is only what you see on the day is what matters, isn't it, really? There's always a reason why somebody's running what they're running, and it's pretty obvious when it happens. But anyway, that's the allocation. It's all because Pirelli are the monopoly tyre supplier, and they want to try to reduce the number of tyres they have to make to keep the cost down as much as possible. And one of the ways of doing that is to say we have this very distinct allocation because that limits the numbers, but the teams have the freedom to choose. Because what they don't want to do is be accused of just saying these are the tyres and it's going to suit some teams and not others. So to avoid that, they allow the teams to choose the tyres from the 3 compounds that they want. Paulo Souza, hi Peter, do you consider Sainz a top 5 driver? I was greatly surprised to learn from you that Brazil has had a Brazilian Formula One team. Makes me very proud, even if it wasn't very successful. Yeah, well, the Copaçuca Formula One team, Brazilian team. Richard de Villa was the chief engineer. Somebody else pretty good was on that car as well. I think Ralph Bellamy was there for a while. Anyway, those 2 good ones. And it was a big Brazilian Formula One team. And didn't go that well, but Emerson had a Keke Rosberg drove for them, and Emerson I think had a P3 at one point, maybe 73, 74 Belgian, I think, maybe something like that. I need to look it up, but it wasn't that bad. I mean, people trash it. The first Copaçuca was a sort of elongated aero thing, and it didn't go very well. It looked very impressive, very big bodywork, large sign writing billboard for Copaçuca. But then they got down to more sort of normal looking cars, and then it went quite well. It was a big thing for Emerson because he'd won these 2 world championships at Lotus and then at McLaren. And then at the end of 75, he just announced that he was going to go to Copaçuca, and James Hunt suddenly took his place. It's Ollie Bearman and put the car on the pole for the first race he drove for him. And so it was a big thing. But yeah, it was something. Anyway, going back to Sainz, top 5. Well, let's think about that. Obviously, you got Max, Charles, Lewis, and then in no particular order, you've got George, you've got Perez, you've got Sainz, you've got Lando, you've got Piastri. And is Sainz going to be in that 5? If you think George is in there, that's difficult. I've never been very good at, as I said many times, people ask me who are your top 3, what's the best 3 races of all time or the best 3 drivers. comparing and limiting it to that is very difficult. But I'd say science has developed and progressed a lot in the last 12 months as a driver. It sounds a little bit condescending to say that, but I think he has. I think he's found his own sweet spots, and he's pretty good at operating within those. And he's very professional. He drove beautifully in Bahrain, I thought. Great shame. I mean, he drove beautifully with appendicitis in Saudi Arabia, didn't he, on the Thursday? Amazing how quick he was. And then he went into hospital for an operation. Then he was back at the track on Sunday. So I'd certainly say he's up there with Lando. I think George is quicker over a lap. Don't have much doubt in saying that. And I think Piastri could be quicker over a lap, to be honest. But I don't know. He's somewhere thereabouts. I'd say he's probably about 6 or 7, maybe. Really pushed. Saros Saman. Hi, Peter. What's your assessment of Ross Brawn as an engineer strategist principal? He was the only team that used to challenge Newey, Benetton versus Williams, Ferrari versus McLaren, Brawn versus... Yeah, got a lot of time for Ross. A lot of time. Just a calm, logical thinker. A bit like Adrian Newey. He just thinks logically, and he's intelligent, and he's knowledgeable. He doesn't get panicky. And I mean, it was interesting. Just thinking about that, I mentioned earlier that 97 European Grand Prix when Michael and Jacques Villeneuve had that coming together caused by Michael, and Jacques went on to win the World Championship as a result. And Michael came back to the gap to pits absolutely convinced that Jacques had caused the whole thing and should be disqualified from the race. And interestingly, Ross said to Michael in the heat of the moment, I think you need to look at the TV, Michael, because I think when you do, you'll have a very different opinion, very calmly. And Michael did. And that's probably the reason Michael and Ross got on so well. And probably Todd as well with Ross, because Ross had this way and has this way. He's very calm and very logical and very, very good manager of people. And I think he always had a good feel for who to put with him to do the job well. And the team that he and Michael and Todd put together at Ferrari was classic Ross, really. It was just all good people that he could work with, that he knew their skills, he knew their weaker points, and he got all those things out of them and did it really well. Yes, Benetton seemed to have a software in the car in 94 that was in breach of the regulations in terms of traction control and launch. But there's no proof ever that software was ever used. And equally, it was found in a Williams as well subsequently. And they said they never used it either. So there's never been conclusive proof. I mean, Ayrton Senna himself said that he felt that the Benetton was running illegal traction control when he stopped by the circuit at Aida in 94, the race before Imola. And he went into Imola believing that car was illegal. And that's one of the reasons I've always felt that Ayrton was so convinced that he had to be flat through Tamburello at the restart, because he knew Michael was in this Benetton, this very special Benetton, and he wanted to get a break from Michael out of Tamburello down that long straight down towards Tosa. Because if he had backed off going through Tamburello, absolutely for sure Michael would have just gone down the inside into Tosa. So, but there's no proof that they were doing anything illegal at the time. And in fact, Frank Durney has said that if they were running traction control, you would have heard something very different from what Ayrton said he thought he heard trackside at Aida. But then, that's what they would say, wouldn't they? Anyway, yeah, Ross Brawn, got a lot of time for him, and he's mad on his fishing, isn't he? So I imagine he's doing quite a lot of that right now. I think he lives very near, right over a river. I think a river might even go under his house or something like that. Drop the old fishing line in, a bit like Kimi. I don't know if it's true or not, but I heard this. Kimi apparently has this swimming pool right outside his bedroom where he can literally just stagger out of bed, open the windows, and just drop straight into the pool. A bit like Ross with the old fishing line out the window. Sarosh Soman again. What's your comparison of Prost versus Mansell? For me, the similarities are much more than differences in terms of driving. Mansell looked to be a touch faster, since maybe Prost left more margin. Similar drivers in that they both short corner drivers, but yes, Mansell definitely. I mean, if Ayrton Senna took braking in a straight line and longer corners and geometric apexes to its ultimate extreme, then Nigel took short corners to the ultimate extreme. Yes, he had other shortcomings. We won't go into those, but in terms of his technique, that's what he did. Whereas Prost, as you say, it's quite, when you are a short corner driver and you have that feel, that manipulation, and you have that supple, soft touch that enables you to do all those things, to get the rotation point at exactly the right moment and to make it look easy. You can also leave a more margin than if you are an Ayrton type driver, which is why Ayrton type drivers often do make mistakes, because all they can do is just try to brake a little bit later or get on the power a little bit sooner, and then they've got this moment, and then they have to back away from the moment. Whereas the manipulative driver is always on top of the car, and that's what Prost was. And I think the more he raced, the more he did leave some margin, logically, because he could make up for it in other ways with his experience, set up what he was going to do in traffic, etc. But when he was, for example, when he was at Renault. And again, I mentioned earlier this 82 Swiss Grand Prix at Dijon, when Prost was unbelievably quick. Race morning, I remember he was on full tanks and he was like, quicker than, I think it was 0.3 quicker than Arnoux, who was on lighter fuel. Just unbelievably quick. And so you never had that image of Prost, the professor, or Prost, the guy that would always bring the car home. If you look back at the 80s, if I think back to the 80s and watching Prost, my overriding memory is of this guy who was unbelievably quick. That was all I could say about Prost. Really quick, and made very few mistakes. Very few. And so I think he's underrated these days because he's been sort of pigeonholed as this driver that was just sort of Mr. Safety or Mr. Leave the margin, but he wasn't. He was really quick. But but Nigel never really went into that zone of leaving any margin. He was always absolutely there on the edge. Again, not because he was ham-fisted or super brave, but because that's how he drove. He knew he could do it, total confidence and balance and feel, and so he did it. And I know a lot of people will say, how can you compare golf with Formula One? But if you're on a par 5 and the second shot means going over a lake and a whole string of bunkers to get the ball on the green, but you can do it because it's 295 yards and you can hit 296 yards with your 3-wood, Nigel will go with the 3-wood every time, and you'll get it on the green too. And that's what Nigel was all about. Always. It was, and I think a lot of it was due to his early days in Formula One, when he was always back in the back of the pack in a difficult car, but all he could do was relate himself to his teammate and make sure he did a quicker lap time than his teammate in qualifying, and then outrace his teammate and do the best job he could. And that's sort of never give up and always show how quick you are, even if it's for 12th place. That's what characterized Nigel, and still does today, actually, in terms of a lot of the things he does. So those are the main differences. Whereas I think Prost did start to come back from that super quick limit we saw in the early 80s. Nigel was unbelievable. I mean, that's I keep going back to that Swiss Grand Prix. I'm just thinking about it, that 82. I can't remember why, but he did start from the back of the grid, I remember, and I think he finished 8th or something in that race. Nobody ever talks about that race. Cosworth Lotus 88. Was it Lotus? Yeah. And it was, or 87 probably. I don't know. Lost track on all those Lotuses. But Nigel, it was an unbelievable performance. I think Elio drove very well too, from memory, from that day. He just won the Austrian Grand Prix, of course, in that finish against Keke Rosberg when he won by 0.001 or whatever it was. And that was 82 Dijon, was Keke's first win, of course. Why am I thinking about that race? I don't know. Anyway, Nigel drove really well that day. So let's move on. ZMVPZ. Hi, Peter. Do you think Ferrari can catch Red Bull with upgrades this year? No, I don't actually. I don't think that's going to... I don't think the upgrades are going to be enough. I know they've got potential. I mean, Scarbs' analysis of the car... they've got potential to do quite a lot at the rear, haven't they? And to make the rear a bit tidier, so that would happen. But when you think about what Red Bull have done, what Adrian's done with the back of the RB20, it's a lot of repackaging of important components to create much more efficient channels at the back, and that's not something you can do with upgrades. I think the Ferrari will be a quicker car in 4 months' time than it is now if they go back to Saudi Arabia or Bahrain. But I think the Red Bull will be quicker as well. So I think it'll stay. I imagine the gap's going to stay about where it is. I'm not saying Ferrari won't win a race. Of course, that's a different question. And I think they could well win a race because it only takes 2 Red Bulls to have a problem. But and Charles on the same day to have a good race, or maybe even Carlos Sainz. Let's hope for his sake in terms of his career. But in terms of actually challenging Red Bull, no, I don't think that's going to happen. Lucas Noxio, isn't Norris versus Piastri 1-1? In terms of results this year, yeah, I think it is. Yeah, it is. We only had 2 races, but bear in mind, Lando Norris is the sort of new number 1 at McLaren, long-term contract. He's the future. That's where he's put his stake in the ground forevermore. The team love him, and he's got a great car and team around him. And Oscar's the young rookie, if you like, in his second season. In theory, Lando should be ahead of him every race by 1 or 2 tenths. It should be a sort of Verstappen-Perez thing, but it isn't at all, is it? I mean, here he is. After 2 races, they're 1-1 already. So that's what you could say. That's what I do say, actually. David Ocanta, Norris, the new Daniel Ricciardo, LOL. Yeah, he is, isn't he? He's a little bit Danielish. I love listening to Lando on the radio. He always sounds like, oh, well, yeah, he got the oversteer, but, I guess, I can live with that. Yeah, okay, but, what about the front wing? He's brilliant. My only regret with Lando is that I just don't think he understands how Oscar drives and why lap for lap Oscar really is going to be quicker, if all other things being equal. And I wish he would, because I think he's got the talent and all the physical attributes to be able to get to that next level of short corners. But I don't think he is. I think he's just sort of staying where he is. He's plateauing into this area, and he does it very, very well. And where he is, he can win Grand Prix from there from time to time. But I think he could be even better than he is if he looked a little bit more inwardly. Jonathan Lewis, should Carlos sue over his grid penalty in Vegas? Let's not open Pandora's box. Well, checkered flags being waved at the wrong time, grates coming up, the damage. Yeah, absolutely. That's more Freddie Vasseur suing, isn't it? I imagine. But yeah, I mean, the amount of damage they did. I still can't get over Toto Wolff's reaction when Freddie was in the press conference in Miami after that, the day of that shunt, when the grate came up and destroyed the Ferrari chassis. And Freddie said something like, it's an absolute disgrace and this should not happen. This is what happens when we race in these sorts of situations. And Toto said, well, I think that's completely unfair. It's a wonderful race. Look at all the preparation they've done. And isn't all the there was no acknowledgement at all of having of a Ferrari Formula One car just having been written off. And I think Freddie was absolutely right there to be incensed by it. But yeah, there've been other, what about Sterling Moss, 1960 Dutch Grand Prix, chasing Jack Brabham, and Jack hits a concrete bollard or something on the apex, and it goes back and hits Sterling's car, punctures the tyre. Yeah. What about Sterling remonstrating with the marshals in the 58 Portuguese Grand Prix at, I think, Porto, and saying, oh no, I saw Mike Hawthorne's car and he was quite correct in getting out and pushing it into a place of safety because it was in a dangerous position. He should not be disqualified from this race. And he got the result overturned. And Mike Hawthorne then went on to win the World Championship. There's so many of these things now, if you start dredging them up. But it's not. It's Pandora's box, as you say. And I think Kalami 81 is definitely something that should be raised. And I think Abu Dhabi 21 should be revisited big time. Lucas Knox, I doubt it. He needs a close championship to gain some experience first. I don't know what that's. Yeah, probably. I think you're right. Rayo, British drivers will reign over Formula One in 10 with Bearman, Russell, Norris. Yeah, absolutely. America's Choice question. Stewart did not like the Tyrrell, the short wheelbase and too twitchy. He preferred the 69 Matra. Yeah, that's absolutely right. He loved that Matra MS 80. And he liked the Matra MS10, actually, the 68 car. That 73 Tyrrell was very short wheelbase, very twitchy. But that 74 Tyrrell that I was talking about in the Scheckter picture was a longer wheelbase car with a much bigger sweet spot and a really good balance and a high level of grip. And it was a very impressive car in the hands of Jody Scheckter and Patrick Depailler. So that's the point I was making, that 74 car was a really good car, and so sad that Francois never got a chance to race that. America's Choice also says Prost was very sympathetic to the machinery. He was indeed. I'm not sure he was more sympathetic than René Arnoux in the Renault. I think if you look at how he was in the McLaren era, yes. But in his Renault era, I wouldn't have said he was more sympathetic then. He was so quick that it was difficult to... I mean, he had the same problem with the Michelin tyres. He had the same problem with gearboxes and things that Renault had at that time. Exactly the same issues that Arnoux had. So I don't think that was always the case with Prost. I'm not saying he was unsympathetic. I just think I think that sort of feel for coming slightly out of the throttle when you're flat out and not taking it to maximum revs in every gear, that sort of came in the Honda era with Prost. I think more to that. Yeah, I mean, if you think about Prost, actually, the problem he had in that Renault era was the Michelins, because you never really knew from one race to the next how the Michelins were going to react. And sometimes Michelin would turn up with a new compound and you could be really quick on it, but you didn't know if it was going to last 10 laps, 30 laps or the full race distance. And so you then, and again, that Dijon race, I remember he was super quick and was really quick, but then he was so quick that he then backed away because he thought, I don't want to overdo the tyres and I'm going to look after the tyres. But in backing away, he actually took temperature out of the tyres. They picked up marbles and they're actually worse than they would have been had he gone quicker in retrospect. But of course, he didn't know that at the time. That's what racing was all about in the early 80s, particularly when Michelin were finding their way at that point. They'd won a championship by then, of course, but it was still, a lot of it was suck it and see. Samuel NG, I heard Max to Aston Martin today because of the Honda engine. Really? Yeah, I don't think he's going to think. Why would Max think Honda are going to do a much better job than Red Bull Technologies, powertrain technology, are going to do on the 26 engine? Why would he think that? Because the Red Bull technology have done a great job on this engine, haven't they, with help from Honda, and they're going to have a little bit of input from Ford, but it's basically a Red Bull engine, and that's what they're doing in 26. And I suspect Adrian's very much behind that engine, so I find that hard to believe that he would. I can imagine that he might think, well, no, I can't even imagine he would think any of that, actually. I can't imagine he would go to Aston Martin. Sorry, I just can't picture it. Bastet, no idea. I only know a few drivers: Leclerc, Verstappen, Piastri, Sainz, and Alonso. Oh, okay. All right. Good. If you know them, that's great. They're all good people. Super 23. Mercedes is such a bad car. I'm not going to read out the word that you've said there. People can see it, I guess. Have they hired Gunther Steiner? Now, come on. That's being a little bit, I don't know, contentious, is it not? So what are we doing here? America's Choice. We're down it from Australia. Okay, let's have some questions. Come on, let's get going, because there's a few chatting amongst yourselves going on here, all of which is okay, but time is limited to some extent. I need to get on with some blue. Short corners and late braking. What are you talking about? Okay, that's interesting. Do we need to go right back to square one? I've done several videos on this channel about the differences in driving style between some drivers and others, and a video about how many of the great drivers have all basically driven the same way, which is to extend the straight by starting to turn in a little bit earlier to the corner while still maintaining maximum speed, and then braking down to a very, very slow minimum speed rotation, and then getting the car straight and then accelerating in a straight line out of the corner. So you're extending the straight both ends of the corner. And as personally, I first began to think about this when I read Jim Clark's autobiography. Having watched Clark drive myself at Warwick Farm in 65, 66, 67 and 68, having watched him drive and then read in his autobiography that he says in his autobiography, I feel that I have this tendency to turn into the corners earlier than most drivers. I started to think about that and talk to many drivers about that and many engineers about that. And then I read Mark Donohue's book about the friction circle and how important it is to trade off steering load against braking rather than brake in a straight line and then turn in. And then I met Mark and got to know Mark quite well, and we talked a lot about that as well. And so it all went from there, really. And then I met Rob Wilson, who is totally committed to that being the quickest way for a car to go around a circuit. So that's what it's all about. And I often say on videos over race weekends, when the graphics come up about who's braking where, I often say, yeah, but what point are they braking to? Because a driver like Max Verstappen is not braking to the same point as a driver like Sergio Perez. So you can't compare them in terms of where they hit the brakes initially. Hope all that makes sense. As I say, you really need to have a look at some of the videos we've done on that. We've done about 4 videos, I think, on effectively the way drivers, difference between style and various drivers. MVPZ. I saw the debrief from Mercedes too before coming back here. One lie after the other. Well, I wouldn't have said they're lying. Well, I don't know. You say what you want to say, but Andrew Shavlin, good man. Whether he actually believes all that or whether that's the party line, I don't know. But it does sound pretty trite, really, in terms of what really happened on race day in Saudi Arabia. So, Michael Skilton, I don't understand Mercedes. Last year, the platform wasn't stable or predictable. This year, James Allison made a point about the rear end and anti-dive, and yet they still have issues. Exactly. Let me read. Actually, he doesn't send chat stuff here, but he's a regular correspondent. There's a chap called John Vitalik. I hope I've forgotten how to pronounce his name. I'm really sad about that. I'm sorry. And this is what he said to me today. He said, it looks like the Mercedes technical brain trust in Brackley has got it wrong again. Knife edge, unstable rear end, bouncing in fast corners, slower through the fast sweepers at Jeddah than they were in 2023, despite a huge redesign for 2024. They had the 4th or 5th fastest cars in Saudi Arabia, finishing with less than half the points of last year, and they don't have a clue what's wrong with the W15. And then he finishes by Lewis's move to Ferrari next year looks to be right on the money. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of people, you think Mercedes would be a little bit more logical in what they're saying at the moment, wouldn't you? But not good. And the problem is, it's not Red Bull are getting blown away by. It's actually McLaren and Aston Martin, really, if you look at Saudi Arabia. So, Prodigy. Hi, Peter. What do you think of the Spanish Grand Prix / Barcelona? Yeah, I've always liked the Spanish Grand Prix. I've always liked the Spanish Grand Prix at Barcelona. Lots of nice corners there. Nice track, nice part of the world. Love going to that race. I've always loved the Spanish Grand Prix in its various venues that I've managed to watch. Montjuic Park in the early 70s, Jarama also in the early 70s, and then Barcelona. So yeah, I love them. It's a shame that there's going to be potentially no more races in Barcelona when the Madrid street race comes on strong, but we'll see what happens there a little bit further down the road. Willem Heukamp, rumours that Newey will follow Verstappen to Mercedes in 26. Bron, Dutch Formula One ex-driver Lammers. Well, I know Jan really well. Lovely guy. We were really good buddies when he was racing Formula One. He always had a laugh. He was such a funny bloke and good driver, good little driver. I say little because he's small in stature, but really good guy. All the best to him. He's semi-involved, I think, in the Dutch Grand Prix in Zandvoort. Sort of Tim Schenken type role. Tim in Melbourne. This whole Horner, Verstappen, all this stuff. The only thing that actually matters, I think, at the end of all this is where Adrian Newey ends up. If he stays at Red Bull, everything will stay the same. If Adrian Newey has got the hump on something that's going on right now behind the scenes and wants to leave, that's a big thing. That is the biggest thing that can happen, much bigger than anything else. And so where he goes is absolutely critical to what happens. So that's where we need to watch this space there. Super chats coming in. Very good. Austin Jesters, thank you very much. I know that Max has 56 wins, but people seem to have forgotten or just don't respect his first 10 wins over a 5-year period in the third fastest car and in the peak of Mercedes dominance. Only driver to beat the W11 on pace. Yeah, no, I mean, I certainly hadn't forgotten that. And not only his wins, his drives sometimes to finish 4th or 5th in a car that was the third best car out there, and he just never gave up. Very Nigel Mansell-esque at that stage of his career when the Red Bull wasn't a winning car. Absolutely, and that did not go unnoticed, certainly from my perspective. And I'd also say, I was thinking about the other day that if you take last year's Singapore out of the equation, which was a bit of an anomaly, they're not going to get every race right, and I suppose you have to take Brazil out. Max has basically been dominating since mid 22 right through to today. When I say dominating. But those wins, when you're winning easily and everybody else is hopeless, I agree. It's not, doesn't devalue the win at all, but it does make it more difficult to quantify the win. And when you're in a difficult car, that's when it's much more appropriate, I think, to judge the driver. Another super chat. Thank you, Matthew Brown. Hope you're having a great day, Peter. I don't think Adrian will go to Ferrari. I just don't think he'll want to uproot all the way to Italy when Mercedes is just down the road and Red Bull are doing okay. Yeah, I agree with you. I've said a couple of times that had Adrian been offered, and I've just used this number, plucking it out of the sky, 1 billion euros 5 years ago, I think he might have gone to Ferrari, and I think Ferrari would have won a couple of world championships by now and would have got their money back. But it's too late for that now. I don't believe, like you, I don't believe he would do that. And yes, he might go to Mercedes if the whole Red Bull thing implodes. It's the most logical thing, isn't it? It's in the same part of the world, as you say. Or he may just stop. He may just say to himself, I've had enough of Formula One. It's all too political. It's ridiculous. I'm going to go and do something else. He may do that. Because he's a racer, and these things would annoy him as much as they annoy any racer. That stupid things happen that aren't to do with Formula One. It is annoying, isn't it? Some people may say, "Oh, isn't it fun?" But those of us who actually think about it, think, "What's it all about?" Van Balza says he mentions the similarity between Norris and Daniel because they're both overrated. Well, yeah. Daniel was overrated, I think, when he went to Renault and McLaren. People expected too much from him because they thought it would be the same Daniel had been winning races at Red Bull. But what they got was a guy who'd suddenly got a massive amount of money in his bank account and walked away from the best team in Formula One. And that does quite a lot to your inner self. And so it was a different Daniel. He's starting to get back there, I think, but he needs to start blowing Yuki Tsunoda away if he's really going to be taken seriously as a potential Red Bull driver again. At the moment, Yuki's doing a good job, isn't he? LW Wright. Hi, Peter. Is Max Verstappen like a better Jos Verstappen, or do they really have different styles? Is that a genuine question? Am I supposed to be saying, or am I supposed to be saying, doing a technical analysis? I'll take the latter part, I think, which is completely and utterly different drivers. For Jos Verstappen, read Christian Danner. This is my mate Christian Danner, who actually was very important in the career of Adrian Newey, because he was race engineer to Christian Danner in one of his first ever motor races when Christian was in Formula 2. Christian, very good, knowledgeable German commentator these days. But he was massive oversteer driver, Christian. I mean, unbelievable oversteer in Formula 2. I remember watching him at Thruxton. And so was Max, so was Jos. Jos was very hard on the rear tyres, very hard. And he was just an oversteer driver, complete opposite to Max, actually. It's difficult to believe they're even related when you look at the two, the way they drive. Or maybe Jos told Max all the things that he got wrong, and Max then did all the things that Jos didn't do, and here he is. Okay, tyre allocations are set by Pirelli. No, they're not. Well, yes, they are set by Pirelli in terms of what the compound is and where they're taking it from, the range of compounds. But in terms of the team knowing what it wants to choose, how many reds and stuff, the team still can choose the number of tyres it thinks it wants of the various up to a certain point. I think, or if they changed that rule. I don't think they have. I think the teams still get to choose that bit. But of course, the Pirelli people choose what range of compounds are available, and they're different race to race. Well, not always. Sometimes it's the same from one race to another, but usually they're different. Lucas Noxio. It's crazy to me that Max is just casually streaming FIFA with friends on Team Redline right now. Well, why not? There's nothing going on. He's just doing what he has fun with. Why not? So, yeah, Samuel just washed. He was good. Yeah, he was good. But he should never have left Red Bull. He should have stayed there and taken his medicine whenever Max was doing a great job. But he would have beaten Max on a couple of occasions, as indeed Sergio has. He would have beaten Max more often than Sergio has. Let's put it that way, in my opinion. So I'm not going to... Actually, I put this one up. I shouldn't have really. It says Vettel should stick to picking up trash. That's a silly comment. I mean, he's a good man, and we don't want that sort of stuff. Super 23. Pull yourself together. He's doing quite a lot to help the environment now, I think, isn't he, Seb? He's a good bloke. But I think he is sticking to that, isn't he? Why do you say that? Vettel to come back? Okay. Right. Klaas Klinkert. Hi, Peter. Do you know anything about the Ford engine? Thanks. No, as I say, it's a Red Bull power unit, Red Bull powertrain power unit, as this one is. And obviously Red Bull along the way learned a lot from Honda. And Adrian, I'm sure, has a big imprint on everything that's going on the powertrain side, which means bad news for everybody else. And I think Ford will not be asked to do any more than they're capable of doing. Is that the right way to phrase it? And I think they possibly will be quite capable of doing a little bit on the electronics or electric side of this 2026 Formula One engine, which is 50% electrified. So I think Ford will have a little bit to play there on the electric side. I doubt they'll have anything to do on the PU side as such, if you see what I mean, the internal combustion side. It'll all be Red Bull. Oh, okay. Since 2020, teams cannot choose tyres. All right, I'm stand up there to be completely ridiculed and that I didn't know what I was talking about. It's only because I take no interest in that at all. Why then does everybody worry about how many sets they've got left and all that stuff? I mean, just look at what they're on, and that's what they're on. That's my point. I never understood why that was important information. Okay, good. Well, there you go. I think on the assumption that you're right and I'm wrong, I'm not 100% convinced I'm wrong, but I'm happy to concede I am, if I am. Eduardo Castro. Peter, what about long lap penalty like MotoGP? You're asking me questions tonight that I'm floundering with. I don't know anything about MotoGP, sadly, or the long lap penalty. But I'm assuming that what happens is that, I don't know, what do they say? Whatever your average lap time is, and then we'll multiply it by 3, and that is the penalty you should get. Is that what it is? I don't know. So, David Okanta. Peter, what's your favourite circuit? Today or ever? I find that very difficult to answer that question, even today, let alone of all time. I couldn't answer it all time. I'd probably say Warwick Farm, where I grew up. Fabulous circuit. Everything was right. Lovely layout. Lap time was perfect. It was great for all the cars that wanted to race there. Lovely people. Everything was wonderful. Sydney. So I'd say Warwick Farm. Today on the Formula One calendar, well, we certainly haven't had my favourite circuit yet. Oh, and Bahrain I would put in my top 5, I think. It's not bad. Well, as an event to go to, I would still say Monza. I'd love going to Italy. I love going to the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. But as a circuit, it's pretty bland and it's pretty emasculated. So it wouldn't be my favourite circuit. As a racetrack, as a circuit, I guess it would be Suzuka. I think in terms of watching the cars and what the drivers are doing with the cars, it would still be Suzuka. All right, another question. Right. AUTDELUX. Auto Deluxe, something like that. I find it comical that we try to reduce the tyres a race car can use over a weekend. Meanwhile, we fly to 24 races with the whole Formula One package. Yeah. Well, there are lots of inequalities, I think. In the way Formula One is trying not to spend too much money, and that's just one of them. But that 24 race thing all over the world is a function of that's where the money is, and they have to go and get the money in order to survive. And if they didn't do that, the teams wouldn't be able to pay their bills. The money comes in from the race promoter, which indirectly means TV rights. And without that, if we only had 8 races, there would be nothing like enough money to do what they do. That's why. The more races, the more money. They have to find that unhappy medium between the two. So, America's choice, Alonso. Peter hates Fernando. What's that all about? He's one of my dear friends, Fernando Alonso, and I rate him very highly as a racing driver. As anybody who's been watching my channel for the last 20 years, 15 years, knows perfectly well, so we'll move on from that one. Blue, LW, totally different driving styles. I don't know what that's all about. Manuel Fernandez, Luanda, Angola. Hi there. Peter, what do you think about fastest lap of the race in Jeddah with tyre age 43 lap by Ferrari? It's signal that Red Bull must worry. Sorry, my bad English. No, your English is totally okay and much better than my whatever. What I think about that is that the hard tyre was a really difficult tyre to manage. And let's not use that word manage because it doesn't mean anything. It was a really difficult tyre when it was new, and then it went through various heat cycles. And obviously by the end it was pretty good, but for the first 25 laps it was not very good at all. Whereas the medium got better and better as well, didn't it? And so I think Lewis was quite lucky to be on the mediums for as long as he was, and he got quite a lot of confidence from the car once the mediums really came into their own, as did Lando. And it was a good, I mean, that Mercedes is saying, oh, well, you know, in retrospect, maybe we should have stacked the cars. Well, if they'd stacked the cars, they would have put Lewis on the hard tyre, which would have been diabolical. If he found the car difficult to drive, you know, initially in qualifying, what would he, with the back end as it was, what would he have done on the hard tyre when it was new? If George was finding it difficult, much better to have kept Lewis out on the medium tyre. It was a great call. And right at the end, obviously that tyre was pretty good. But Max did the same. Max was 1/10 slower than Charles on his penultimate lap, leaving lots of margin still because he wanted to win that Grand Prix. And there are quite a lot of marbles and things you can hit and things you can do wrong if you really stretch the car. So I think Max was driving at about, let's say, 7/10 when he did that time, which was 1/10 slower than Charles Leclerc. So I don't think you should read anything into that, to be honest. So what are we doing here? There's a lot of chat amongst themselves. Lucas Noxio says, I'm not sure I put Perez up in the top 5. Well, you know, to each their own. I don't think there are many drivers who put the power down as well as Perez out of medium speed and slow speed corners when there's a long straight that can really reward that. And he does a really good job alongside Max. I'm not sure that many drivers could do the same job that Perez has done over the last couple of years for Max. He's been really good. So I actually rate Perez quite highly for that, for what he is and what he's able to do. He's quite capable of winning Grand Prix on any given day. Cameron says, Cameron W, hi Peter, I have several photos from the 73 season that I'd like to show you. Is there a platform, Facebook, etc., where I can post them for you to see? Let me think how we do that. Could you perhaps DM me on X? Might be the best way, and I can give you some details of how we could do that. I don't use X that much because of the whole Elon Musk thing, but I've still got an X thing. So yeah, DM me on there and I'll look out for it, Cameron. Thank you very much. I'd be fascinated to see this. Okay, enough of this Peter, why do you hate Alonso stuff? Don't ask questions like that, please. I find it, you know, I just think, what am I doing here when you ask questions like that? Because it's completely ludicrous. And I've never, ever hated Fernando Alonso. Okay? Okay, good. Hope you get that. So, hi Peter, nice to catch you live. Do you think that the Horner thing will affect Max's performance? No, not at all. Max will be quite capable of, if it was going to affect him, it would have affected him already. Not at all. He's just a race driver, he gets on with it. And he would know that, yes, Christian is very, very good at a lot of things, but he's not the only Christian Horner in the world. There are others out there, and Jonathan Wheatley could easily step in and do a very good job at Red Bull if that's what would be required. I have no doubt about that, and with Adrian there and everybody else. So I don't think he's worried about that. His only concern would be about Adrian and what Adrian's doing. So, and if he's okay, that would be it. There we go. Jan and Kevin Magnussen are closer in driving styles than Jos and Max. Yeah, I've never really watched Jan Magnussen. I can't really honestly say anything about him. The only thing I know about Jan is that when he was driving for Stewart and Jackie wanted to help him in a couple of areas, and I know what they would have been. It would have been stability of the platform and very, very supple inputs to make things less spiky. Jan didn't respond at all. So that's all I can say. Trail break 3, there you go. I got goosebumps when I saw Carlos at the Saudi race. Racing means everything to him. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you've had your operation and the medic says, yeah, you're ready to go, what are you going to do? Sit in the hotel room? No, you got to go to the Grand Prix. Not much else to do. I wouldn't have thought, probably shouldn't be saying that. But yeah, why wouldn't he be there? If only to show everybody that he's still around, looking good and healthy, and he's going to be in the car in Australia. Thank you very much. He's got to protect his little patch as well. But yeah, no, wonderful to see him there. Good man. Got a lot of time for Carlos Sainz and his dad. Great family. They're all about humility and manners, and I think that's a nice thing. Willem Heukamp says, we in Holland are absolutely sure that Max will leave Red Bull. All his friends and people close to him tell us that. Mercedes is the most likely, with Newey and Marco to go with him to Mercedes in 26. So Helmut Marko to take over from Toto Wolff. Wow, that'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Wow. Well, let's wait and see. Here we go. So what are we doing here? Arsene Martins, Braun Silverstone 98 strategy masterclass. I respect this man since then. Yeah, that was an amazing. That was the wet dry race, wasn't it? Everybody went off, including Lewis. But it was there a lot of strategy involved? I don't know, probably. But where was it? It was Magny Cours. I don't know what, 2001 or something like that, maybe. I don't know. It was Magny Cours early 2000 when they ran the 4-stop strategy on Michael. That was really good, wasn't it? Eduardo Castro, Peter, maybe the reverse grid isn't a bad idea after all with the current state of domination of Red Bull. Well, I can tell you this, if they decided to do reverse grids just to stop Red Bull dominating, who do you think would be suing the FIA at the end of the year and winning? Right. Peter Carroll Kraus, I've only seen Jan at Lime Rock. Great racetrack, actually. Sam Posey's home track. I don't have his methods committed to memory. Oh, okay. All right. So there we go. Seems to be a lot of talk about Jos and Max racing. I mean, what are these people? Come on, we got more important things to talk about, I think. Have we not? Where we go. Arsene Martin says, Briatore in the team. Yes, it's sure. Benetton was cheating. Well, they were, yeah, I don't know, were they? America's Choice says Mansell was crazy competitive. Well, at least that's better than saying that I hate Fernando Alonso, so there you go. Yeah, we're talking a lot about, here's one, Raul Mansell is Senna tier. Well, that's good to hear. I'm doing an event with Nigel at the Williams factory, May 22, in aid of his charity, UK Youth, and it's just going to be a chat about life and the universe. Should be fun. Not sure how you get tickets for it. Watch this space, I think. But I'll be there, hopefully. That's the plan anyway. We'll see what happens. Should be a good laugh. I love hanging out with Nigel. I always learn from Nigel. Always something we talk about that's always Wow, really? Well, cool. That's so cool. Yeah, come on. Who's this? Willem Hoykamp. It's 2024, Peter. It's not 1988. Come on, talk about now. Well, sorry, Willem. There are plenty of other live streams and channels you can go to and watch. I love talking about the sport in a whole, and I don't think the past should be relegated to the past. I think it's part of the present and part of the future, because we wouldn't be where we are today without a lot of the stuff that happened in the past. And showing disrespect to the past is a terrible, terrible mistake. So with respect, I'm going to ignore that one. Lucha, have you heard of Leah Block? She's a 17-year-old American driver for Williams, and her dad was one of the best rally races ever. She might have a real shot at making it. Yes, I've heard that that's happening, and of course, yeah, her dad was wonderful, very, very talented, and did some work with Rob Wilson, interestingly enough. So yeah, she might well have a good chance. We'll be watching that for sure. But I still watch regularly Tatiana Calderon and what she's doing. She's racing IMSA now, and I really respect that she is out there racing in these categories one-on-one with the guys. Not the only female doing that, but she's been doing it for quite a long time now and doing it well. And she did a lot of the testing on the new Formula 2 car as well. So good luck for her, to her. So just going back to the top of the chat again. Kind of learning how to do this now, I think, sort of. This is a question. I can't actually pronounce the name of the sender, but anyway, he says, do you guys think Max will leave Red Bull for another team in the near future? I'm saying no, but I could be wrong on that one, because it's a bit of a sort of 50-50, and you got to know all the details to really make an opinion. But from where I sit, I'd be surprised. Anyway, we'll see. Jer Robertson says Abu Dhabi was just a 21 was just poor strategy from Merck that cost Lewis the win. Hang on a sec, I can't let that one go. What was the strategy that was poor? I don't understand. What strategy was poor? They knew the rules, which was that all lap cars had to unlap themselves before the race could be restarted. So there was absolutely no way you could make a pit stop. So tell me what strategy they got wrong. You know, it doesn't make any sense. When you make comments like that, it just doesn't make any sense, because it doesn't bear any relation to the reality of what actually happened. Norris, his transponder did not show he moved out of his box. Yeah, that's right, all that transponder stuff. But what happened to having belt and braces guys on every row of the grid to watch with their eyes what's happening, just in case there's a problem with the transponder? Isn't that what a sport at this level, with the amount of money that's being spent everywhere by every team and every element of the sport and the industry, isn't that what you'd expect? I would. There's some very odd questions tonight. I don't know why that is. Maybe people are just getting very bored of Formula One and the Max thing. I don't know. But Dennis Melvin saying, I think Hamilton is ready for his bus pass. I mean, Dennis, that is not a particularly clever statement. And you know it's nonsense, because Lewis is still incredibly good and very motivated. Rowan Jose, what do you think about the future of current top Formula 2 drivers and lack of seats? By the way, this live format is awesome. Thank you very much. I'm glad you like the format. I think it's incredibly frustrating how difficult it is for talented drivers to get an opportunity if they do well in Formula 2. What do they do if they don't get a Formula 1 offer or chance? They can either get some sort of test driver, reserve driver role where they're pictured in the garage periodically and do nothing, apart from all the stuff in the factory, the sim and everything, but that's not what they want to do. Or they go to IndyCar or Japanese Super Formula or Formula E. I mean, it's not right. I keep saying we need to have a second division of Formula 1, which is in its own right, has its own championship, has a different name, obviously, but it should be at the venues that can't afford to be on the proper Formula 1 calendar. Plenty in South America. South Africa's another one. India, all these countries that can't get into the calendar because it's so expensive. That's where that championship should take place, and it should be in last year's cars. And let's face it, last year's cars are used a lot by the teams now for testing, and it should be F2 drivers graduating to that. That's what we should have. because there's not enough opportunity for all these talented guys. Frederick Vesti being a very good example. And Theo Pourchaire is another, F2 champion. He's got to wait until there's a slot, really, before we see Theo doing what he can do. Per Johansson, do you think BMW returned to Formula One? I think not, would be my thing. I mean, we know Audi have said they're going to do all this. I'm not sure they've actually done any of that stuff yet with Sauber. And there's some funny things going on there with Oliver Hoffman being moved off the board. I mean, why did they do that? I can understand him changing roles in terms of building up the strategy of how they're going to do Formula One from 26 onwards. But why is Oliver off the board now at Audi? I don't understand that. Well, I do. I mean, the new guy thinks he wasn't doing a great job on the technical development of the road cars, I think, as far as I know. Right, just scrolling back to the top again. Lulu Tupu. Grosjean doing well in Indy. Max will be very good, I think. You're saying if Max does Indy, he'll be very good. Yeah, I'm sure he would be very good. One thing's for sure, he'll be quick everywhere, ovals and road courses. But Grosjean's doing well. Yeah, good to see. Yeah, he made some bad decisions in his career as well. Why did he leave Renault to go to Haas? Didn't make any sense. Anyway, so Mallory Tallman says, it feels almost like Mercedes has an idea of what should be the correct answer to these regulations and is stubbornly trying to force it. Yeah. Peter, what are some of your favourite memories of Charlie Whiting? Well, I knew Charlie when he was chief mechanic at Brabham when Nelson was winning his world championships. So my memories of him are of that period, a very hardworking guy. I was a bit in awe of him, really. I always felt that if you didn't ask an intelligent question, these were the days when journalists like me were able to talk to mechanics and engineers and team owners and drivers without a problem. I always felt that with Charlie, you had to have your ducks in a row in terms of understanding what the sport was all about and ask a specifically relevant question. Otherwise, he'd give you short shrift and you'd be on your way. So is that a happy memory? It's certainly a memory of enormous respect for the guy's ability and his knowledge. And when he became FIA technical delegate and then later on race director, he was very, very good with me when I was in a TV role and I wanted to ask a question about something I didn't understand, and I would sort of wave when he was sitting in his office, he'd be on the phone and he'd put the phone down and then, yeah, come in. And I'd ask the question and he'd spend 10 minutes explaining it in a very calm way and very logical. And a couple of times I would make a point and he would say, oh yeah, it's a good point, we need to look into that. And he would. And he was as good as his word. And I always had a lot of respect for him. Of course, his brother, Nick, was a very fast racing driver, saloon car driver mainly, but very quick. And sadly, died in very suspicious, nasty circumstances. So I always had that. I always had that sympathy for Charlie, I guess, is what it was. I mean, I was treading on glass a little bit when I was near him because of all that, and I wanted to try and say the right thing and kind of let him know that I knew about Nick and respected him as a race driver as well. So yeah, good man. Going back to the top now, scrolling down. Underground Alien Studios. Get it right, Peter. Max has won 19 out of the last 20 races. Yeah, amazing. That's literally a 95% win rate over the past 20 races. Yeah, incredible, eh? Peter Carroll Kraus. Good evening, Peter. Do you think Fernando will give the Indy 500 a few more tries? Only if he... To do that, Fernando would have to decide that he's leaving Formula One, I think. I don't think he'd need to switch off the Formula One switch. And then he would need to say, do I still want to drive race cars? And if I do, what do I want to do? And he then might say, yeah, I want to win that Indy 500. It's annoying me, and I know I can be quick there, and I'm going to go out and get a drive. I wouldn't put that past him, but he's not quite as young as he was when he did Indy before. And I don't know, is it an enjoyable thing for a Fernando Alonso who's had so much fun in Formula One over the years? Some bad moments, obviously, but some good moments too. Very good moments. Is Indy as enjoyable as it used to be? Or ever was? I don't know how enjoyable. I mean, Jim Clark ended up not really liking it at all. And I suppose winning it is an incredibly pleasurable thing, but the rest of it must be a complete pain, I would have thought. If it's somebody like Fernando, just wants to get on and race hard, all that strategy and pit stops and traffic and everything else and yellows. And I don't know. I can't imagine he would enjoy all that, but I suppose he might. Say another one. HWEBHENKIE. Good evening, Peter. Love the show. Will Verstappen follow Honda to Aston Martin? Yeah, well, we talked about that. I don't think he will. I really don't think he will. I'd be surprised if he does. I'm surprised more people aren't saying Lance had a terrible race. What happens if Lance decides he's really had enough? What is the future of Aston Martin? Isn't that quite a good question? Bearing in mind Lawrence Stroll is only in it because he believes his son is quite capable of winning the World Championship. And look what he did. He hit an apex and broke the left front suspension on an apex and then crashed into the wall on the right-hand side, the Tech Pro barrier. And so... how would he be feeling after that? Well, he said, oh, well, these things happen. I was pushing the car really hard. But when you're pushing the car really hard at a place like Saudi Arabia, it's kind of odd then to hit the guardrail on the apex of the slowest corner on the circuit. Wouldn't you, if you're pushing really hard and you had an instant, you would imagine it would be on the fast S's, on the marbles or something, wouldn't you? Sort of Guan Yu Zhou type shunt. I don't know. I just found the whole thing very confusing. We got another super chat here. Thank you very much. This is from Austin Jessis. Yeah. How can Formula One make these cars lighter and smaller? The weight and size seem to make it really hard to follow. I know the battery is heavy, but could they shrink them any? Well, it's a good question because that is what is part of the remit for post 26 when they are going to electrification with the power units. But from sort of 28 onwards, in theory, the cars are going to be lighter and smaller. And a lot of people, including Scarbs and myself, say, well, how are they going to do that? And you, obviously, because every time they make some improvement with safety on the cars, it actually puts weight on the cars. So that improving the safety is not going to stop because we want the cars to be safer year on year. And as you say, there's a lot of stuff. And if they're going to 50% electrification, there's a lot of stuff that's going to be quite heavy on those cars. So how are they going to do it? Let's hope that Formula One comes up with some sort of unbelievable battery design which weighs absolutely nothing and has incredibly fast charging and lasts forever. Formula One engineers, there is your goal. That's about the only way it's going to happen, I think, isn't it? But they do say they're going to make them smaller and lighter. I wish they would. I mean, the way to make them smaller and lighter actually is to go back to V8s and V10s probably, but anyway. Scott Meredith. Peter, what's your response to those who think a 400K cost cap breach makes all their accomplishments irrelevant? Well, we talked about that at the time, and I said at the time, and this had nothing to do with Red Bull winning that championship. It was something they're going to pay a penalty for, but it had as much effect as a car being disqualified for being slightly underweight or a front wing being 1 millimeter too high or too low. It's one of those things, and they weren't the only team that got it slightly wrong. I think they pushed the limits of that, just like they pushed the limits of design and everything else. You push the limits of the cost cap, don't you? And they got caught. But as a function of the overall performance, it was not significant. And anyway, it was taken, the testing time was taken away, wind tunnel and CFD, for the next car. So to me, it's more a point of I don't believe in the cost cap in the first place. I think it's all wrong. America's Choice. Yuki has the Bushido spirit. Yeah, okay, I kind of get that. This is in a response to my saying that Yuki's been looking good alongside Daniel. Andrew Storm, has Daniel been poor for the last 3 years? Well, yeah, he hasn't been the same driver ever since he left Red Bull. Because if you, as I say, if you leave the best team in Formula One because you don't like the way the other driver is going quickly for whatever reason, you basically, even if you try not to think about that and you only think about the next team and the money, it will eat away inside you because you walked away from the best team in Formula One. And how many years did Daniel spend trying to get into the best team in Formula One? And as I said, I think he would have won more races than Perez has won ever since he left. Red Bull is the fastest car Formula One has ever seen. Well, it should have, because it's the best car at the moment. And at the moment, we should have faster cars than we've ever had before. Isn't that what progress is all about? But of course, I hear what you say. And obviously, the regulations play a huge role in defining what is the fastest car ever seen. Certainly, the most technically advanced car we've ever seen was the 92 Williams FW14B, and whoever that viewer was that said stop talking about the past, there's a good example about why I won't stop talking about the past, because if we did, we wouldn't be able to talk about the Williams FW14B. So there we go. Bhavesh Singhal, hi Peter, have Haas taken things too far in using teammates to hold things up? Do we think more teams will now try the same one where the driver racks up penalties and the other gets? Oh, come on. You're saying that was deliberate? No, I think that was a good thing that Haas did. I think it was that showed the new management style at Haas, and it showed the new way the drivers respond to the new management style. And Kevin did the right thing, and Nico drove well. The big question in my mind, while I was pausing there, is because I was thinking about Kevin and how aggressive he was. And a couple of times he did overstep the mark. Maybe a couple of times it wasn't his fault in the classic racing sense, but in terms of the rule book and the sporting regulations, it was. Should he back away from that a little bit, and should he become more, less aggressive? That's a big call, because that's part of what Kevin Magnussen's all about. But my feeling is, if I was managing Kevin, I would say you are sufficiently good technically as a driver not to have to be so aggressive in traffic. Just be what you are as a racing driver, and when you're feeling that moment of rush, adrenaline, do this, go for that gap, just think about it a little bit. Try and put yourself in a bit of an Alan Prost mode or a Niki Lauda mode at the back end of their careers, and save the car and save the penalties, and just rely on how good you are as a racing driver. That's what I would say. And he might say, wow, yeah, I hadn't really thought I was that good, but you think I am that good? I'd say, yeah, you are. You're really good. I don't know. Here we are. America's Choice, talking about German Grand Prix 57, amazing drive for Fangio. Yeah, absolutely. In the Maserati 250F around the Nürburgring. One of his greatest drives, no doubt about it. And will live in the memory of anybody who saw it. Sadly, I wasn't there. A bit too young for that one, but I've read a lot about it. And yeah, the look on his face when he got out of the car, the oil smears on his face where the goggles were, you could just tell he'd given 100% around the world's greatest circuit. Fangio was a man among men, Super 23 says. So let's get on with some more. There seems to be a lot of in-house chat today. Again, I shouldn't discourage any of that, but I need to try and sort of find the ones that I can be a part of, really. Of course, Bearman did well, says Roy, but don't you think he's being hyped too much? Well, I don't know. I don't look at any of the hype. I don't look at what anybody else is saying or talking, so I can only talk about myself. And I thought he did very well, but I've given a lot of credit to Jock Clear, and I've also just spent 10 minutes talking about Ayrton Simmons, who out-qualified Oliver Bearman in Brands Hatch GB3 2021 when he was in a really not uncompetitive, in a shoestring car. Ayrton Simmons, that is. And I'm saying, isn't it sad people like Ayrton never get an opportunity just purely because they don't have the money? That's what I have said. So I can't talk about the hype because, as I say, I'm not a hype type person. RV, what do you think will happen to Alpine in the near future? It's looking quite bad at the moment. They have no engine customer. Yeah. That's what you say is nobody would want the Renault engine anyway. I'm not sure that's right. I think they want an engine customer. I think that's probably more to the point because they've got enough going on. Not that having a customer these days is that difficult because it's all templated, isn't it? But nonetheless, it's there. What will happen in Alpine? I don't know. Total chaos, isn't it? Looks like a team really, really struggling. I mean, they are not in good shape at all. And if they fired Otmar Staffnau because they wanted better results sooner, just after they were getting podium finishes and looking really good, what are they going to be doing now when Pierre Gasly stops on the second lap with a gearbox problem and Ocon's down at the back of the field somewhere, lost without trace? So I don't know. It just shows they have no idea what they're doing, really, because why would you get rid of somebody like Otmar, who's got a pretty good clue of how to go forward with a team, and here they are, much worse than they were before. Ridiculous. Can't say any more than that, really. The days of, I remember going over to Viry-Châtillon in '74 when I was with Competition Car, when they were building the first V6 2-litre V6 engine. They were racing at Le Mans, and was a great engine. Drivers like Jabouille, Depailler, Josso. And it was a really thing, and Gordini was a big deal then, and the Amadei Gordini legacy, and I just loved the whole Renault thing, and all the people were really nice. Francois Castaing, Tetou, Marie-Claude Beaumont, all of them brilliant people, and that engine became, in 1.5 litre form, the basis of the turbo Formula One Renault engine. And so it went on. That's where it all started. And I was very grateful that I was given that opportunity to go over there and write that piece right back at the beginning of the whole Renault resurgence. And it's so sad to see it today in the way it is, all that corporate stuff and the branding, and just, I don't know, it's just not the same place at all. And I, at the risk of annoying people who talk about the past, I'm going to talk about the past. And I think it's because it was human beings then, and there was good management of humans. And I think today it's very corporate and very, very middle management layers, and it's lost its touch. Here's a good question. Thomas Beddoe. Hi, Peter. In 10 years, do you think Lando will have one world championship to his name? What about Oscar? Well, what you're asking me is, do I think he's going to be in a team capable of enabling him to win Grand Prix and put together, therefore, a world championship around those Grand Prix wins? It's pretty clear that Lando thinks his future's at McLaren. That's what he signed, a long-term deal, and Zach's been with him right from the start, and his dad and Zach and Lando, they all get on really well, and it's a great team to be a part of, great brand. But will they ever win a championship against Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes maybe, Aston Martin possibly? In the next 10 years, it's a long way to look. I mean, you're talking to a guy, or you're listening to a guy who's been around long enough in Formula One to sort of think like the Formula One people that I know and love, who never think more than 3 months in advance. I can't get my head around 10 years from now what Formula One will be like, even, let alone 20. Will they be flying cars or something? I don't know. I think if it was, I'd put my money on Oscar, actually, more than Lando, I would say, if it was one or the other to get that result. But I don't, I can't say any more than that. I don't go down those roads, really. I can't, because I just can't see the future as well as perhaps I should. Carlos is the best, says James. Yeah, he is good. He's a good man. Good to have him around. B. Guzman, Spa is good. Yeah, is it? I don't know. I've never enjoyed Spa, but I think what the question was, what circuits I enjoy. I've always found Spa, it's always a bit cold and wet and annoying in terms of staying anywhere. It's very expensive if you want to stay in a decent hotel near the track. But putting all that to one side, because none of that's important really. Everybody says, oh, Eau Rouge, and maybe they say Pouhon, maybe Blanchimont after that. I'd rather the S's at Suzuka. I'd rather the two Degner corners at Suzuka, and I'd rather Dunlop curve, the left-hander at Suzuka, and I think I'd rather Spoon as well than any corner at Spa. So yeah, I still stick with my Suzuka thing. This is a question. Another super chat says, "How does Alpine recover?" Rehire Otmar Stefanel would be the first thing I would imagine. And yeah, I mean, they're not short of pace with the drivers, so that's okay. But they need somebody like Otmar or Christian Horner or somebody, like that, who can put together a team and talk to people and who's got their priorities right in terms of Formula One, as distinct from all the other stuff that's automotive industry related stuff, which is no bearing on Formula One. I was get a bit confused when the press releases come through with Alpine, because usually it's doubled up with something they're doing in rallying or sports cars or something. I'm thinking, Alpine do a double this and sports cars and Formula One. I'm thinking, how can you possibly? I mean, Frank Williams was paranoid about even thinking about doing anything beyond Formula One for a long time. And occasionally Patrick would sort of go and do a rally car, or they tried to do that. Was it the Longhorn Indy car with Al Unser? I think it was called Longhorn Racing or something like that, which was basically an FW07 for IndyCar, which never really happened. But Frank just had this belief that Formula One is the thing, and here's Alpine doing all these different things. I just don't understand it, really. Surely you look at the past to learn how to go forward, do you not? Greg Ashukian says, now the field is the most competitive ever and top teams are at a bigger disadvantage. No one can just spend to win. Yeah, that's true. As I've said several times, the bad thing about the budget cap is that teams like Mercedes and Ferrari and Aston Martin and maybe McLaren, they probably don't have quite as much access to money. But if there was no budget cap, those first three teams that I mentioned could all mid-season do a completely new car and on what they've learned from Red Bull and try to take it to Red Bull, and we could be saying, well, maybe they will be right there by Monza or something, but because of the budget cap we don't see that anymore. And I find that quite a shame, because I think that's part of Formula One, seeing how people react very quickly to things, and this fast development of the cars, no expense spared, is part of Formula One. And you'd say, oh, well, the no expense spared is really bad for the image. But then is it any worse for the image than the carbon footprint of 24 races around the planet? I don't know. James says, Carlos to Red Bull. Yeah, I can see Red Bull would like him back. Don't forget he was a Toro Rosso driver. But you'd have to say, is he going to do a better job than Sergio Perez alongside Max Verstappen, bearing in mind what they want from that car? I'm not saying lap for lap compare them. I'm saying what they want from that second car. Is Carlos necessarily going to do a better job? And does he bring the same money to the team that Perez brings? Which is money for nothing, really, from their point of view. So I don't think that's the question they'd have to ask. And I think the answer would be, well, we might as well keep Perez. That's what I think they'll think. Equally, they may think, oh, we need to clean up our act a bit, and Carlos has got a great image and he'd be perfect image for the new look Red Bull. Maybe this whole Horner thing will help Carlos in that way. Jer Robertson says, I think Alpine will not recover at all. Don't let the Alpine people hear you say that. Okay. So where are we going now? I'm going to read a few more now before I'm... Mark Terry says, I'm so sick of all the YouTube Red Bull drama. Let's stick... Is it YouTube? Surely it's all on TikTok or whatever it is. Insta, isn't it? People, anyway, maybe they're doing it all on YouTube. I don't know. They're all sick of the RedTube. You're sick of the YouTube Red Bull drama. Let's stick to the on-track product and let not support all the rumours. Thanks, Peter, for your insights on the track product. Thank you very much. Well, I totally agree with you. I'm a bit surprised that it's been on YouTube, because that implies there's lots of people talking about it inside Red Bull. I'd be surprised if they are, but anyway. As I say, I'm just going to look see what the end result is. Bit like what tyres they will end up on race day. Grey Horse 1. Should Bentley run an F1 team? I talked to Sammy Davis about this. I've always wanted to say that. He was one of the Bentley boys, and he was my predecessor, one of my predecessors actually, at Autocar. He was the first ever sports editor of Autocar, and I was about the fifth ever, sports editor of Autocar. There are only about 6 in total, I think. And he, as one of the Bentley boys, we became good friends. Obviously, I have massive respect for him. I've got his autograph even. And I did say to him once, you know, what about Bentley? Why didn't you do Formula One? He said, oh, no, Le Mans the thing, old boy. Le Mans the thing. So isn't that what they think, the Bentley boys? That's what they were all about, wasn't it? Grosvenor Square and, you know, roll up the sleeves in the old Bentley superchargers. I'm being supercilious, aren't I? But I'm talking about the past as well. I just can't see the Bentley name in Formula One. It just doesn't sound right, does it? Don't know why. It just seems to ring a bell when it comes to Le Mans. Thoughts on WEC? Dane 458. None really. I don't really understand it anymore. All the cars look the same. I have no idea what cars they're in, and it's a blur to me. I look at, Matt Bishop did a thing today. Sorry, I'm going to talk about the past again. Matt Bishop on his wonderful X thing where he talks about on this day, did a wonderful thing on Vic Elford, who died on this day, remembering Vic Elford. A fabulous picture of Vic in it's a Longtail 917. I'll read Matt's thing. It's a lovely post. It says, 2 years ago at 86, one of racing's all-time unsung heroes, Vic Elford, a man who mastered the mighty 917 almost no one else, like nobody else, and said of his first Le Mans outing in it, I could go through the Mulsanne kink at 250 miles an hour, 402 kilometers an hour. Yeah, he was superb, Vic. And I'd just like to say, don't forget what this guy achieved, Vic Elford, that is, in 68, when he won the Daytona 24 Hours, the Targa Florio, the Monte Carlo Rally, all in the space of about 3 months, and then finished 4th in the French Grand Prix in his Formula One debut in the wet in an uncompetitive Cooper BRM. Not bad, with no testing. And so anyway, that nice picture there of Vic in the 917 Longtail. Spooky car. What do I think of WEC? Really, to me, the WEC is about those great days, Ford versus Ferrari versus Porsche, the Targa. I love all that. And I've got lots of books about all that. And I read it endlessly because I love the past. Whoever that was has really got my goat and I'm going for it. Hello, Jackson. How are you doing? All right? You're a Porsche fan, aren't you? 917s, 9083s, 91710s. Yeah, there you go. Jack Windsor, a man who knows what he's talking about. What I do quite like is, nobody's asked me about it, is the WRC. And I'm thinking of going to the Portuguese Rally of Portugal in May. Just have a look, go up into the mountains and watch them. Any thoughts on that, anyone? I love rallying, always have. Grip 9K. What are the good options for Sainz? I view him as a top driver and every bit the measure of Leclerc. Where do you see him going next year? Well, I have been asked this question many times and I haven't changed my view, which is that I think it would be tempting for him to sign a short-term deal with Mercedes, maybe plug in there for a year and see what it's like and how he goes. But he would have George in the other car, which wouldn't be great. And then he's got Mercedes telling everybody how wonderful the great Kimi is, which wouldn't be great either. So it'd be a bit uncomfortable, unless he can get them to forget about the great Kimi and to sign a 5-year deal. Then he should definitely do it. But I don't think it's going to happen. I think they're so committed to the great Kimi that they're going to do it. So that's that. Red Bull, similar story really. Unless Red Bull completely falls apart, Adrian goes somewhere else, Christian Horner leaves, Max leaves, and all of a sudden it's Carlos Sainz is the new number one driver for Red Bull for the future. Of course he should take that. That's definitely, absolutely no discussion about that. But on the assumption that that doesn't happen and that Max stays at Red Bull, as does Adrian Newey, and potentially he's offered the drive alongside Max, and it's not offered in its entirety to Alex Albon or to Perez, even then he's got Max in the other car, and it was enough to drive Daniel Ricciardo crazy. So it's not going to be great for Carlos there either, which leaves Audi in my view. And I still think if you take the longer, medium to long-term view, he's great for the brand. He would like all that calm, systematic way of operating. He brings a bit of Spanish flair to a fairly austere Sauber and Audi approach to life, which would be a nice thing for the team. And he brings a lot of Formula One feel and experience and touch. So I think, who knows how Audi are going to go in 2026. It could be that they're really struggling to be on the dance floor for a few years. It could be that they hit the ground running and they've got a pretty good car with a pretty good power unit. And transaxle. So then, that would be a great thing for Carlos, because he could grow with the team, grow organically with Audi, and become a part of their brand forevermore. So that's what I think. Anky Panky. Mr. Windsor, do you think Adrian Newey to Ferrari is a possibility? I mean, is there any way possible? It's possible because they might be game-changing for Ferrari. Well, I think, as I say many times now, it would have been better had Ferrari offered him the big deal 4 or 5 or 6 years ago, which they should have done in my view, and they didn't due to poor management. They should have offered him a lot of money and got him, because once you've got him, you're 80% there. And they would have won, in my view, they would have won several world championships by now and got all that money back. But I think it's too late now to persuade Adrian to go all the way to Italy and to get into all that. So I don't think they'd do it. I think it's... And Adrian's, he's been around a long time. I still question whether Adrian, if the whole Red Bull thing falls apart, whether he'd still then want to go into something else, or whether he would just enjoy his life, enjoy his classic racing, enjoy other stuff that he does very well and designs, and just take life a little bit easier. I think he might do that if the whole Red Bull thing just collapses. If it does. It's a big if. Headwind John. Ollie Bearman or Liam Lawson, who deserves a seat more? Well, they both deserve Formula One seats. I think Ollie sooner than I think Liam sooner than Ollie, because Ollie could easily do another year of Formula 2 if he doesn't win the championship this year. But on the assumption that he does, I suppose you've got to say he would then be in Formula 1. But I think Liam is, he definitely, I think, should be in the second Red Bull team next year. And I'm sure that probably will happen. It's a big statement to make, but I think he's good enough, and I'm sure he's impressed enough people. Great car control, a lot of commitment, tough guy, doesn't talk too much, just gets on with it. Good racing driver. Where Penky, do you still walk your flat staircase as a workout? It's a good question. I was thinking about that the other day and thinking, yeah, I quite enjoyed all that. It was quite a good workout during COVID because we stayed inside. We were all boxed in, and I had 7 floors up and down in the fire escape there, so it worked out pretty well. But no, where we live in Spain now, I've got a gym just around the corner, and it's a really good gym. We're there most days, and it's, you look out the window and the sun's shining, and go for a run, go for a walk as well, take the dog out. Lovely. F. Wild, how good was Elio De Angelis? He was very close on points to Ayrton in '85. Yeah, Elio was very good. He was as good as Carlos Sainz, I'd say. Similar style, actually. Similar style, similar person in some ways. Very classy, class act, I think is the right way to say it, and well-mannered, dignified, and a nice person too. Funny guy, very cool guy. Smoked, very good jazz pianist. Really miss Elio. Really good bloke. When he wasn't as quick as Nigel, that's a fact, but he was quick. He was very quick. And he was Carlos Sainz quick, definitely. Hernani Luz. If cost cap and wind tunnel restrictions weren't in place, Ferrari and Mercedes would have closed the gap already. I know where you're coming from about that, but the evidence is, of course, that they still actually don't know what's wrong with their cars. So I think they would have done several renditions of Red Bulls by now, and maybe by luck they might have just managed to hit on it and got a car that really worked. Yeah, that's what they would be doing if there was no cost cap. But the evidence suggests that they would have had quite a lot of attempts and spent a lot of money before they found whoa, bingo, we got a car finally. I remember I had that feeling when was it, 80, would have been 83 British Grand Prix, was it? I think I seem to remember it was Silverstone when the Gerard Ducarouge car, Lotus, which he'd built in something like 8 weeks, all this stuff about, it takes 3 years to change a team. He came in and he lived in a little house next to the Lotus factory and just worked 24/7, designed this car based on a Ligier or something else he'd just done. And it was literally 8 weeks. And Nigel got in this car, call it mid-season, and he said it was just like night and day. It was suddenly a racing car. It was stiff. He could make changes to it. He could feel the changes immediately. It was a quick car, good grip, good balance. He could feel the road, everything he wanted that he hadn't had at any point. Just completely transformed the car. So, yeah, those were the days. Gerard Ducarouge. Really miss Gerard. Great engineer. Lovely guy, too. Used to have a lot of laughs with Gerard. One of my best buddies, actually, in Formula One for a long time. I even put up with all those gitana he used to smoke. In fact, he smelled more of Brut aftershave than he did of Gitane, if I think about it. We've had that one about Liam Lawson, Ollie Bearman, Tony Donnellan. Which driver has the best golf handicap? Well, I can tell you that straight away. If any current Grand Prix driver played Nigel Mansell, they'd get whipped right now, today. Even though Nigel's just had something. He was in hospital recently for an op, but he's out now playing golf again. And Nigel at his worst plays off about 3. He's really good golfer. I don't know how many people know this, but when was it? 88, about 88, 89, around that time, he did the Australian Open. It was a PGA event, PGA Australia event, and a lot of European Tour players do. And he didn't make the cut, but he shot 77 on the second day on a PGA event. And I remember on that day, Ian Woosnam, who was a winner at that time, absolute winner, shot a 76. It was windy and difficult. That's how good Nigel is. Of the others, I think is it Carlos Sainz? Maybe I haven't really seen Lando. That ridiculous video that those people put out, which showed nothing of Lando's swing at all, when they could have spent a bit of time just showing us what his balance and his rhythm and timing was like. We couldn't see anything at all. What I saw of Carlos Sainz, he wasn't bad at all. I wouldn't say in the Nigel class, but he looked pretty consistent. That's for sure. Michael Skilton, with respect to the hard compound tyres, they needed some heat cycles to improve performance. Wouldn't you heat cycle them in FP1, FP2 for race day? Well, you would think that, but there is this thing, this Pirelli thing. How many new sets of tyres? Everybody, if you got a new set, you got to run it. New sets are better than used sets. I can't remember the last time anybody in Formula One said, no, we're running scrub tyres. They're much quicker than the new tyres. Does it ever happen these days? You imagine it would. And I'm not sure that the Pirellis are the same as the good old days when you could do a heat cycle on a tyre and then put it to one side and then use it effectively in the race. And that also suggests that you really know what the tyre is doing and where it's going, which usually you only got through proper testing, which we never have in Formula One anyway. So it's all a big question mark, really, for the teams, what the tyres are going to do anyway. This is H. Stone, how would the Adelaide circuit suit modern Formula One cars, and would it offer better racing than Melbourne? Well, I think it'd be fine. I don't see why it wouldn't be just as good as it always was, which was great. Of course, there'd be a lot of moaners out there about the paddock area or something, and this and that, but don't worry about them. The track, I think, would be great. It was a good circuit, Adelaide. I really enjoyed Adelaide as a fan and as an observer and somebody who worked there. I loved it. More than Melbourne, actually, because I think Melbourne is a bit bland. I think you're right. Whereas Adelaide had real character as a racetrack. Fabulous race, actually. I've always said, that Australian Grand Prix at the end of the year at Adelaide, what a way to finish the season. Perfect. Okay, here we go. Martin Christie says, Peter, a long lap penalty in MotoGP is an extended corner, so guilty rider loses real time and maybe 5 places, but keeps momentum, tyre temp, etc. Oh, okay. All right, good. Works better than post-race 5 seconds, etc. Yeah, okay. Sounds a bit complicated for the FIA to put that into action, doesn't it, after everything we've been saying about him? Macon says, hey, Peter, I love the time you spend with Cameron. You're making him better. Oh, I don't think he's making me better, actually. What does Formula One need to do to rise back to the top of motorsport? I think WEC might be better series at the moment. Wow. Well, I see why somebody asked about WEC now and where you're all coming from. Well, some of you. What does Formula One need to do to rise back to the top of motorsport? Wow, imagine if somebody at Liberty saw that. Because we're told constantly by Liberty that Formula One is not only the greatest form of motorsport, it's one of the greatest forms of sport in the world. And here you are saying WEC's better. I mean, I'm probably talking out of turn here, but is it not the case that apart from Le Mans, which is like a sort of big institution, you go there even if you don't watch the racing, but apart from Le Mans, people don't watch WEC, do they? The grandstands at most of the racetracks, I think, are pretty much empty, are they not? And the TV coverage doesn't generate massive hits. I think that is the problem, isn't it? I'm asking all these rhetorical questions because I don't really know the answer to them. And I'm thinking that maybe it's got a lot to do with amateur drivers basically funding a lot of what we see in endurance racing anyway. And that's not a great thing, is it? Because it should be a healthier sport. It should be the manufacturers or sponsors. It should be the thing which is all about performance. But they've done a great job to realize that was never going to happen anymore, and the only way to do it is to fund it the way they do and have. So I don't know. I don't think really it's bigger. I don't think Formula One is not the biggest. How can I rephrase? Too many negatives now, sounding like John Surtees. What does Formula One need to do to rise back to the top? I don't think it's lost its position at the top. I think it is still at the top in terms of the money involved, in terms of a number of people that watch Formula One globally, annually. It is massive. And I think you'll find sports car racing, WEC, is a long way behind in those respects. Okay, this is this thing about each team gets 13 sets of dry tyres to use over the weekend, 2 sets of hards, 3 mediums, and 8 softs. Okay, they also get 4 sets of intermediate tyres and 3 sets. Okay, shows how much I know and read about all that stuff. Sorry about that. You're absolutely right. So every team gets 2 sets of hards, 3 mediums, and 8 softs. So the teams don't have to predict. I do remember now I look back, I do remember after 2 years, they said, no, that's all nonsense. We'll just give the teams what they want. Okay. All right. That's why they tried to do it initially, but then they stopped. Thank you very much for that, for pointing that out. Hi, Peter. What has taken you away from X? Do I have to answer that one? I just don't feel comfortable there anymore. That's all I can say. I'm still there. I haven't left it, only because Matt Bishop's there and I like to see what he's putting up on a daily basis because he does a great job with that stuff. And a few other people as well. But in general, I don't know. I just find the whole thing unnecessarily controversial, I suppose is the right way to phrase it. Farah Al-Saharif, have you ever seen a driver that makes no mistakes and be that consistent like Max? Yeah. Jim Clark, Jackie Stewart, Niki Lauda, Alan Prost, Ayrton Senna, and so it goes on. Mario Andretti in 78. Most drivers, when they're somewhere near their peak in terms of their athletic talent and they happen to be in a great car, in a great team, most great drivers then achieve that sort of consistency. And I can remember watching Stewart in 73 and it was just like, it's just completely inevitable that this guy's going to be on the pole and he's going to win this Grand Prix. It was just like so predictable. You just felt there is no other result that can happen. A bit like I feel today about Max, and we all feel a bit about Max, but I felt that about other drivers many times. I was too young to feel that about Jim Clark, to be fair, because I was just a kid when he was racing. I was just a 15-year-old flag marshal in his last year, but I always felt that about Stewart. I always felt that about Prost when he really got into the groove. I always felt that about Ayrton. Watching when Ayrton was on days when he was just at one with the car, it was an inevitable result. And Mario, 78, Mario was unbelievably good in 78 in the Lotus 79. It was unbelievable. It just got the best from the car. Ronnie was quick on occasions and sometimes quicker, but he would make the odd mistake. Mario was just finding this perfect rhythm from circuit to circuit to circuit. He was just wonderful to watch. And so it goes on. Prost, yeah, I've definitely felt that about Prost many times. Lauda, many times. 75, it seemed almost inconceivable that he wouldn't win every race after a while. He was just always there. It just looked so mechanically perfect in everything that he did. And then Emerson, even Emerson, when he was in the groove in 72, particularly in the Lotus 72, he had that, gave that aura off. So it happens a lot, that. So we all think, oh, this Max thing is just, the greatest thing ever. But we got to put it in the context of the history of the sport. And the reason he perhaps is considered to be so much better than everybody else is because he's racing in an era where they do 23, 24 races in a season. And of course, in those other eras of which I was speaking, there were sometimes only 8 races or 15 or 12. So you can't compare it in terms of stats at all. Creole Boy 12. Hi, Peter. Great to catch you early morning in Melbourne. Hi there. Good morning to you. Just how important do you think this year is for Ferrari in terms of nailing not only development but also off-track structures through Vasseur? Well, I've got to answer with a cliche. Every year is important. I think the way to say it is if they go backwards this year and they end up being slower than Aston Martin and finish 5th in the Constructors' Championship, then they obviously don't win a race, then that would be a disaster in terms of Lewis arriving and the whole team going into a completely new era and trying to respond well because the building blocks will be so appalling. But if they continue just to do what they're doing now and race by race, they start to get on top of all those reliability issues, and Charles keeps getting good P3s and maybe a P2 if there's a glitch at Red Bull, and maybe even wins a race or two, and then when we're starting to see the team a lot more harmonious in many ways, strategy-wise, then it's a very important year for them, obviously, because they could go from there. I mean, everybody's thinking of 26 because things aren't going to change that much in 25 even because the regulations aren't changing. But 26 are big changes. So everybody's thinking clean sheet of paper almost. And if we're going to go into 26 in that mode, we want to be in the best possible shape in terms of building blocks and knowledge that we're going to extend into the next era. So it's very important. So does this indicate that the slowest cars cannot reach the speed the hards are on their optimum range? Well, I don't think Mercedes reached the optimum on the hard tyre at any stage of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix compared with other teams. And so, but I wouldn't say they were the slowest cars. There were cars slower than that. The hard tyre in general didn't look to be a great tyre in the race. Yeah, it lasted forever, but it wasn't a great tyre in terms of giving a lot of feedback to the drivers and being easy to drive on when it was relatively new. I'm sure even Max and Perez found that, but obviously to a lesser degree because their car is so much better. But in terms of generally being a tyre that lasted the race because of the characteristics of that circuit and the ambient and everything else, it wasn't a great tyre to be on. And we saw that as the yellow tyre with a lot more miles on it was as quick, if not quicker, than the hard when it was still relatively new. So that says everything you need to know. All right, I'm going to have to wind it up pretty soon because we've been going for 2.25 hours and I've still got a few other things I need to do here today, actually. I'm just going to go through the super chats. I've done that one. Just make sure I've done them all. People very kind. Thank you very much for doing this. But thank you everybody also for being a part of this. It's been, from my point of view, it's been a bit of a fragmented live stream this week today because some funny questions actually. Okay, M.A. Khan, a nice super chat. Nigel was one of the few drivers who kept his speed in the late 30s. in his late 30s. I'm convinced Lewis has lost a little. Mansell was 0.6 faster than Hill at Adelaide in 94. Could he have won in 95 if he'd stayed? I think he could have, actually. I think he was just as quick. He wasn't. He was just as quick. I mean, in leaving Formula One, he went to Indy and he had to sort of regroup completely and take everything that he knew about racing and take it over to the other side of the Atlantic and translate it into ovals and Indy road courses and that lovely Lola, Newman Haas Lola. And he did that really well. And that sort of sparked new things within Nigel, I guess. And he came back refreshed. He got the whole Prost to Williams thing out of his system, and he was driving really well. I mean, obviously, I think he probably would have worked a bit harder on his fitness, maybe, just to really be in great shape for 95. And yeah, he could well have done it. I think he certainly would have won the championship if he'd stayed at Williams in 93, that's for sure. And he could have won it in 95. But it's still an interesting point, isn't it? You know, I go on about Clark winning Indy and Formula One in 65 in the same year. Nigel Mansell won the Formula One World Championship and the IndyCar World Championship in consecutive years. He won the championship in 94. And he almost won Indy, actually. If he hadn't, I think he'd missed his pit stop marker and they had to push the car back. And that actually cost him the win at the Indy 500. He was really quick in the race. So, yeah, great racing driver. Great racing driver. Very underrated even today, particularly by the British press, who never really liked Nigel or got on with him at all. Won't go into that any further, but it was sad times, actually. That was when Formula One... Well, we see it a lot today as well, don't we? A lot of people are very critical of others without really, wondering if they should look inwardly at themselves. A lot of that going on around the world. I'm as guilty as anyone probably. So that's that one. Nice one from Nigel. Thank you very much about Nigel. Is this another one? This is Michael Lawless. Another super chat. Thank you. When do teams start New Era 26 development? Is there enough insight from the rules committee? If Newey were to leave Red Bull, would they have his design concept? All good questions. I think they start 26 development. I'm only guessing here, and Scarbs would know for sure. Is it the end of this year, I think? Over this winter, I think they can start on 26 development. I may be wrong there, but I think it's that. Maybe the beginning of maybe some period in 2025. Is there enough insight from the rules committee? I think there's still quite a lot that needs to be ironed out from what I hear. I don't think it's absolutely clear yet. Some things are clear, I think, on the power unit side, but I don't think other stuff has yet been ironed out. And if Newey were to leave Red Bull, would they have his design concept? Well, they wouldn't now. No, I'm sure they couldn't not be talking about 26 now. They would have to be talking about it. But design concept suggests a design concept with Adrian's signature at the bottom of it. In other words, it's his car, which is what all the current ones are. And I don't think you'd get to that stage until, spring of 2025. So it's a bit of time yet, a year from now, really, for that to be an issue if he is leaving. But if he is leaving, it's an easier time in terms of that complication than most because of this 26 regulation and when you're allowed to start, this policing of when you're allowed to start on the new car. So in that sense, it's a little bit more sanitary than it would otherwise normally be, I guess. So there we go. Samuel, hi Peter, what do you think of how much the driver can have the input in the design of a car? I'm hearing a lot of noise about Lewis leading Merck to the wrong direction. Yeah, I think that's rubbish. And Lewis would give input and thought, and when he's asked, he obviously gives his opinion. But to suggest that Lewis is in any way to blame for the technical dramas at Mercedes is absurd. So there we go. Yeah, no, I was just going back to saying it's a bit of a funny. I was just thrown a little bit by that comment when somebody said, Peter, stop talking about the past, because it does undermine everything that I try to do on this live stream and indeed on my channel, because I won't stop talking about the past. That's the first point. And secondly, I find it incredibly hard to understand why anybody wouldn't want to know about the past or talk about the past and its relevance to what we're doing today or tomorrow, because that is how we learn. And if we don't learn, how are we going to improve as people and as a sport? And that's why I always talk about that. So Sujith, I'm going to ask this last question. What's your view on Kimi Räikkönen in terms of driving style and short corner, long corner aspects? Oh, very short corners. Lovely driver to watch. I'm talking Kimi McLaren spec here. Yeah, beautiful to watch. Supple, soft, complete and utter natural. Didn't think much about it at all. Just got on with it. Incredible feel for the moment of rotation and application of power in a linear way. Getting the car in early, beautifully. Yeah, I think he lost a lot of that. He lost some of it by the time he got to Ferrari, and he lost a lot of it post-Ferrari when he was trying for Alfa or something, wasn't he? But I think, when he was at his peak at McLaren, let's say against Montoya, he was just, Montoya was good, but Kimi was just all over Montoya. He was way ahead of him in those respects. So that's how good Kimi was. But not for long. It was just that little period. So there we go. I think we're going to do... I'm going to end it there because it's been quite a long one, and I've got quite a lot ahead going on actually this week in terms of exhibition work and then off to Melbourne. So lots happening. It'll be a different set of vids from Melbourne because I'll be doing it probably from a hotel room, do my best, if not on the move somewhere. So looking forward to going to Australia and catching up with everybody and seeing everyone. And in the meantime, thank you for being a part of this. It's been a lot of fun. And thanks to Jetcraft, thanks to Pitbox as well, without whom this channel wouldn't be what it is. So please read about them in the description. And I'm going to be wearing my Jetcraft cap, I think, in Melbourne as well, because, I'll tell you why, because Mick Doohan and Jack Doohan are going to be doing a celebration of Mick's Motorcycle World Championships. And Mick's going to ride one of his championship-winning bikes, and Jack is going to do some laps, I think, in a Benetton F1 car. Quite sure of the relevance there, but anyway, he's an Alpine driver, isn't he? So it's one of the cars from their history. So that's going to be great. Looking forward to that. They're both Jetcraft guys, of course. So Jetcraft of the 4 in Melbourne. Good to know that. So there we are. Thank you very much to everybody for being a part of this and for your support of this channel. Stay safe. See you soon.